Hey everybody, this is M.E. Thomas. I'm here with our guest, Bob. Bob, I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everybody, which is what is it like to be you?
In what regard?
I don't know.
Because there's there's a few ways I could interpret that.
Uh-huh.
Do you have a specific way of asking that in mind?
What is your internal experience?
Uh, in what situation? Generally, are you
Yeah.
are you asking what about my internal experience differentiates me from others,
Nope.
or are you asking um what do I internally go through regularly?
Sure.
Okay, regularly.
Hmm.
Um, Curiosity.
That sounds nice.
All right. So speaking, okay, so that's actually what prompted this conversation. So I have a bunch of questions. Um, Particularly about, let's start with psychopathy, just generally. So there's something odd about psychopathy that I don't hear discussed, which is there's a sort of inconsistency, which is that psychopaths don't care about other people. Is that correct?
Mm, I think that it's like nuanced. Like you could kind of say they care less about other people, and or you could kind of specify like they don't care what other people think about them, or you could say they don't have empathy. You know, where they're not feeling the emotions of other people. But I think that they do care about other people. You know, I have people in my life that I like love and care for. And I also kind of just care in general for the goodwill of humanity or whatever.
Right. The regard I'm referring to is that I often hear that psychopaths don't care about the judgment of others. Like, for
Yeah.
example, if a psychopath is condemned by others in a specific regard, say they're said to be annoying, they're said to be cruel, bad, psychopaths are said to not care about those sorts of diagnoses. Is that correct?
Yeah. And do you want to know kind of like a little bit about why that is?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. So in my mind, like if somebody says something to you like that, you know, is critical about you personally, you often, what I've noticed is that people will take that personally, you know, and my therapist would call it an identity hit because they're attacking something about your identity. And if you identify with your identity, like if you're kind of, uh, you have like a reasonable sense of self or something, then somebody, that's why we take it personally. You know, taking it personally means it's enhanced, you know, either for good or for ill. If you take your job personally, then that experience is enhanced for you than if you don't take it personally. So I think that's the best way to think about it. Like think about maybe a job or something that you've had that you haven't taken it personally at all. Whatever the thing is, you've taken it zero personally. And that's how psychopaths are about their own sense of self, is that they just kind of don't care because they're not, for whatever reason, they're not kind of actively engaged in who they are as a person. They don't care.
right.
Yeah, so it's like an identity hit. Then it's like the bigger kind of ego you have, generally speaking, the bigger connection to your like identity, and the broader your sense of identity is. You know, like you include in your identity all your favorite sports teams, your nationality, your gender, your race, you know, your religion, you include all these things, then you're going to be sensitive about a lot of things. You know, like if you're Catholic or something and people say things about Catholic and you take it so personally, then that's kind of, I think, what's happening with normal people. And then psychopaths just have such a small target because it's not as if there's no sense of self. It's just super weak. It's a weak sense of self. And so, like, I think too, they can get like these identity hits and kind of not even understand what happened, is like how little they contextualize things. They're pissed, they feel like they have, the way that other people do when they kind of take an identity hit, that it's like reeling or whatever, with like, you're both offended that somebody said that to you, and your personhood feels a little bit damaged, and you feel, like uh, like it's maybe eating your brain a little bit or something. Like that can happen to a psychopath. A psychopath can take the identity hit, but it's such a small target. It's like a lot less likely.
Right. But I'm asking about a more a weird inconsistency. So here's the
Sure.
first part, and then I'll tell you what seems to be inconsistent with that first part. The first part is that psychopaths don't care much, as you said. They have this very small island of self-identity. So
Mm,
it's a lot harder to hit.
yeah.
However, what seems inconsistent with that is the rage and revenge that a psychopath feels
Mm,
seems inconsistent with somebody who's indifferent, right? If you'd have someone who's truly indifferent to the critique of others, if their critique, they wouldn't respond. But it seems to me that that's not how psychopaths react. They are hell bent on revenge, right?
yeah.
So
Yeah.
it seems this could be entirely wrong. It could be somewhat onto something or entirely correct. And that is as follows. My suspicion is there's this very particular sense in which psychopaths care a lot. In fact, maybe they care more than others in a
Totally.
specific regard. And in some other sense, they really do not care. Do you resonate with that?
Yeah, totally. And people can, like, in the comments or whatever, like kind of give their own opinions about why. And I think that you have done a good job identifying this. My kind of explanation for why this is, and I think kind of a good example of what you're talking about with like an extreme reaction to things, like a super sensitivity that psychopaths have, is like gray rage, for instance. And gray
Exactly.
rage, yeah. When I experience gray rage, just for people who have not heard this before, it's always happens in a particular type of situation where somebody who does not have actual authority over me acts as if they have authority over me. And then that, for whatever reason, just like flips the switch of irrationality for me. Like I go into like almost a fugue state of rage. It's not a hot rage, it's a gray rage. But in that moment, I really feel, and I talk about this in the book, about how one time somebody, like tried to boss me up about walking down a broken escalator in the metro system in Washington, D.C., in the United States. So in the subway. And I followed that guy for like minutes and minutes, thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do to this guy, but I just feel like I want to like strangle the life out of him. And that was like a very all-encompassing thought, and it was really hard to kind of like check myself out of it. And it mostly was just I lost him in the crowd, is probably like the, I didn't have to confront that. But yeah, gray rages. So, and then afterwards, it's like for days I still feel like the effects, almost like I guess when you take ecstasy or something, and then for days, that your body, your brain's just trying to recuperate from like all of the, flood rush of whatever it is that I experienced during the gray rage. Now, my kind of explanation for this is that I think that the reason why psychopaths frequently, so maybe this doesn't apply to everyone, but at least speaking from my personal experience, and at least some of the psychopaths that I've met, they one of the reasons why they have such a small identity is because their personhood was disregarded at some point in their life, but at a point where uh as kind of a result of the disregard to their personhood, they kind of abandoned like their sense of identity to a certain extent, or they never invested in it. They were like, why have an identity if it makes me so vulnerable to being hurt? Like I don't like being hurt. And so instead I will just kind of like detach a little bit, or not progress beyond what I already have progressed. I don't think it's not like a conscious choice that's happening. I think it's just like, you know, just a trauma response.
Right.
Yeah. And so they're super sensitive they're the reason why they're so not caring is because they're so sensitive. And actually, I talk about in the book a little bit about this. They did some researchers in Israel did some research with children and found out that actually it seems to be coming from a super sensitivity instead of like lack of sensitivity, the psychopathy. And yeah, so that's it.
Okay, so to me, that seems on face value like a contradiction. I don't think there actually is one. And there isn't one because we need to get more specific. But the
Okay.
surface level contradiction seems to be psychopaths do not care because they really care. That's a contradiction. So obviously, we don't mean that literally. We mean it in some sense and not the identical sense. So tell me how much you resonate with this. It seems the sense in which psychopaths do not care is this sort of I don't know how to exactly describe it, but there's like everyone knows what an ego is. That's easy to describe.
Mm.
Psychopaths have that, and maybe I should start there. That's where it seems they definitely care, when their ego is violated. But the sense in which they don't care seems to be the sort of collective ego, if you will. Um, and it seems they don't really care about that at all. Like this a better way to describe it instead of a collective ego would be a collective feeling of unity and bonding with others.
Mm.
Psychopaths, from what I understand, don't give a shit about that. They don't give a shit about the feeling of, oh, I'm living harmoniously with X amount of people. And if that's violated, they're indifferent. But it seems when their ego is violated, they do care. And in fact, they care way more than others. Do you resonate with that?
A little bit, for sure. The collective kind of ego, as you put it, and I think it's just that I don't experience. Speaking from my own experience again, I don't really experience that collective sense of identity with anything. Like, I don't really feel female or white or American or Mormon or really any of these things. I don't identify with them. I know they're true, but I don't have like a sense of identifying with that as part of like my core self.
Right. Um,
For the second
okay.
part, you want me to go to the second part?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do think that narcissism, I think the personality trait is kind of variable with psychopaths. I've seen, some narcissists who do care about kind of egocentric things. And I see psychopaths who don't. And I guess kind of the way that I think of it, but this is a really good question. I don't think anyone's ever asked me this before. Uh, I think the way that I conceive of this is, let's say we take somebody who's maybe on the autism spectrum. Like, we know that they have kind of interests, but it's not all trains. For a lot of people, maybe it's the interest in trains and watching trains and etc. But it's not for all. And I love this. I've seen this meme, and this resonates with me with my nephews, where it's like if you're like a 3-year-old boy, your personality is basically either dinosaurs, trucks, construction equipment, or I forget what the other one, cars or something, right? Trains.
Yeah.
And so one psychopath, little, kind of like one little boy's only interested in dinosaurs, not interested in trains. So I think that it's better understood this way, like the trait of narcissism, where there's something about the psychopath experience that doesn't feel engaging, where you don't really feel like it matters, that you even exist in the world. And what you are trying to do with these kind of interests is find something that holds your interest or that you kind of do care about, and then kind of putting all your eggs in that basket because you don't have the normal like interpersonal connections, or you don't care about your hometown sports team, or you don't really care about the fact of whatever your nationality or religion or gender, etc. So what do you care about? I think you kind of choose certain things to care about. For me, it's not really been narcissism. It's been kind of playing games, and uh in this kind of catch and release sense, where I don't even, it's obvious to me that I just care about the game part of like getting one over on people traditionally, like I don't kind of do this as much anymore because I found other ways to be engaged in life. But traditionally it's been like seduction or some of these other kind of pursuits, like even kind of just like it reminds me, I have a family member who is kind of psychopathic, who became like ran an Ironman, or like I guess you run, bike, and swim, but like that type of thing where it has to be like something that for at least a while is kind of keeping your interest. Like, can I push myself to do this particular thing? And I think like I see the aspect of myself that I see in these people with narcissism is it's kind of like the game is, how much can I kind of puff myself up, I guess, uh, to be kind of perceived as better than other people. And that's the game that they're playing. And so when you attack them, I still don't think they're taking it super personally. I think that it's more like somebody's trying to uh it's an aggressive move in the game. It's like you're playing a war game and somebody's invaded your eastern front or whatever. And I think in those situations they think, oh, you think that you're going to play this game with me? No, I will take you completely out. That is my kind of best thought, but you'd have to ask somebody who's like this, who has kind of the narcissistic bent, who's like a really good person for this. And maybe we could do like a joint Zoom on this. Is Dorian always is saying, that he really cares about his appearance. And have you seen any of the Dorian videos?
I don't think so.
Yeah, he has a bunch of tattoos on his face. He's
Oh,
British.
yeah, yeah. The
Yeah.
British paranoid psychopath. Yes, I've
Yeah.
seen those videos.
Yeah. So he experiences narcissism like this. And actually my girlfriend Arya is a little bit this way, where there's something about the kind of like narcissism. I almost wonder if it's like also like a way to show love to oneself. I do like this kind of guided meditation on the Calm app with Jeff Warren. And he has probably like 5% of the guided things are about like sending love back to yourself as a child, or sending love to yourself now in this difficult moment, or all this idea of kind of like treating yourself as like a separate kind of object that you're sending love to. And I think that may be part of it too, where it's like they like the narcissism is like a way that they can kind of care for themselves or kind of fill in the gap of like the lack of sense of self. Like, let's say there's like some psychopaths who have an extremely weak sense of self. Like, we'll just give like random numbers, like
Wait,
1%.
wait. Okay.
Oh, go
A
ahead.
weak sense of self.
Hmm.
Is that feeling negative or lacking a feeling of self, or both?
Well, so I think it kind of depends. Like in my mind, there's a spectrum of like sense of self, and that it often kind of determines what personality disorder you have. Like if you have like 1%, then you're very detached. You're so detached that you probably don't experience narcissism, or you don't have the rage. And since you're so detached, you don't have the rage as much. You don't experience the rage for as many things. And the more kind of narcissistic you get, then that would probably be like 5 to 10% sense of self. And the more kind of connected you get, like if you're at like, let me think real quick. Let's say if you get to like 20% of sense of self or something, these are just random numbers. Who even knows what that means? If you get to 20%, then you're probably more likely to be narcissistic personality disorder. That will be your dominant trait. But if you're kind of in the middle of like the extreme psychopath and the narcissistic personality disorder, you're kind of one of these psychopaths who have mostly psychopathy with like some narcissistic traits. And then the more you get to a sense of self, like 30%, that's when I'm kind of like you're more likely to be borderline personality disorder. And then kind of as you go along these percentages, the further you go along, the more I think it branches out, to where you get to like 60% or 70% sense of self. Then you could be like avoidant personality disorder, or, some of these other ones, depending on your
Wait,
underlying.
but specifically when you say weak and high sense of self, is what is meant you feel yourself, or what is meant is you feel negatively toward yourself? Which one is it?
You feel yourself.
Okay, okay. So in the book, when you talk about struggles with a sense of self, you don't mean low self-esteem. You mean just an absent of feeling yourself.
Yes.
Okay, okay. Um, Now, what you said about the study in Israel with respect to psychopaths, in fact, feeling very sensitive
Yeah.
and and coping with that by being indifferent, that seems to suggest that psychopathy can be cured, doesn't it?
Yes. That's what I think.
But isn't that contrary to what most psychologists say?
Yeah, but if you look into it, Bob, on like some of the data of where they get this idea that it cannot be cured, I think what they kind of mean is that there's no known cure. There's a better way
Uh-huh.
to put it. And it's just like a sloppy way of saying it. They tried different things like in the 70s, like, oh, let's put them in like group therapy and stuff. And then they said it actually made them worse. And then they're like, therefore it's uncurable.
Right, right. So the hasty generalization there.
Yeah.
Um, so now I want to get into the kind of social indifference that psychopaths feel because it's often talked about the empathetic indifference they have, but less often it's talked about the social indifference they have, which I think is more interesting.
Mm.
So, with respect to other people's judgment toward you and others, how does that affect you? So, we'll start with you. If a bunch of people deem you some sort of negative title, how does that make you feel?
Um, Honestly, it kind of depends. And let me kind of say what it means. Like, if so many people think negatively of me and then are kind of like reaching out to say, like, you're terrible, you're the worst, or whatever, like, that does and always has affected me to the extent that if I'm being like socially isolated because of it. Like, if there's enough people that it is causing my life to change, lifestyle to change, like people are like spitting at me or when they recognize me or whatever. Like this hasn't happened, but well, it's happened in certain situations where people are like, "You're a baddie now because of what you've done to this person or what you've done to." Like in the university, this happened to me. Where like I did bad things to this person that was in my program, and then I was kind of known as being like the baddie person to like avoid in the program.
Wait,
Now,
I'm not talking about the physical ramifications of being disliked. I'm talking about the emotional ones.
yeah, the emotional ones is just a fear. The only fear I have is that this can lead to physical ramifications.
Got it, got it.
Yeah,
That's the crucial point because most people, when they're not liked or they're treated negatively by others, there's the physical ramifications. Say they're less trusted and therefore they have less privileges.
good way
But
to
there's also
explain it.
what?
That's a great way to explain it. You have less privileges, fewer
Yeah,
privileges.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. But then there's also this social. There's this an emotional consequence as well. And what I wanted to know is, do psychopaths lack that? And it seems like the answer is yes, because you've only described physical ramifications, not emotional ones.
yeah.
Very interesting. Okay. So if there's, let's say, a person X and a bunch of people do not like that person, for almost anyone else, the fact that X is not liked deeply, deeply affects, both consciously and subconsciously, their interactions and diagnosis of X. Does that happen with you or not at all? And I'm only
Like,
talking about emotionally, not physical, like the physical ramifications that you're calculating.
give me like a little bit more. So in this situation, let's say I have a friend who doesn't like my other friend, and does that affect my view of the disliked friend or whatever?
I'll start with an extreme case so it's very clear. Let's say you're forced to be in a classroom or some sort of interactive environment with, say, 100 people for the next year,
Hmm.
and 98 of them do not like X. How does that make you feel toward X?
Uh, I mean, like probably wary because it's just like take the information. Like if people are distrust that many people, there's at least like a statistical.
Right, no, for sure. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the emotional impact it has on you.
I don't think
Let's
it has an emotional impact on me. I've been friends with a lot of people who have been kind of In fact, my girlfriend always mentions this is that like I almost seem to attract these people as friends because I'm the only one who is not impacted by the dislike of whoever the person is that everyone dislikes.
Okay, so to the question, you are not emotionally distraught being in the minority, you would answer correct.
Yeah.
Interesting, because most people are terrified to be in the minority.
You
What,
know,
yeah.
even I have a friend who went to prison for child porn, and I kind of thought I was like, I'm probably the only one who still sees him the same way.
Uh-huh. Um,
I wrote him regularly in prison. I was like, hey.
so that's interesting with okay, let's get into that. So you let's say, your phone rings one day, it's your friend from prison, they say, "Hey, I've just been arrested and I'm convicted for X amount of years for child porn."
Hmm.
What goes through your mind and how do you feel?
I just kind of think like, hey, do you have an attorney? Is there anything I can do?
And contrast that with a normal person's reaction. How would they react?
I would guess that like this person, I'll base it based on my own experiences as when I came out as a psychopath. People would treated me like negatively, like how can I trust you? And you're a bad person and you deserve what you get.
Hmm. So no, I'm with you that most people's reaction to that is very odd, and I don't actually understand it.
I
To me, it
know.
seems like an emotional pure. It's so odd to me. It's actually I'm shocked at how odd people's reaction to those sorts of things are. Like if I'd get that call, I would think, okay, what's the actual damage you've done to any given person because you've watched something? If there is clear causal ramifications that damage others, that's not good. If there isn't, I don't see the problem actually. I really don't.
Yeah.
So, but no one breaks it down like that. People have like this extreme emotional, gut-wrenching negative reaction that I do not understand. So I totally understand that.
Hmm.
Um, okay, so that earlier I was trying to bring out this sort of inconsistency where you go, yeah, if I'm in the minority, I don't suffer emotional consequences for that. I don't care. But then on the other hand, it seems psychopaths love status. They crave status, being perceived in certain ways. How do you reconcile that?
Well, I think it's kind of what we mentioned before about the opportunities. I do think you get more opportunities with status. And I think too, they're like psychopaths probably crave, and instead of saying status, it's more like they crave power, and really what they crave is control. They don't even like the power for its own sake. They just like the idea of control. But I think it's for the same reasons that everybody likes the illusion of control, because that's usually all it is that you just, you feel more secure.
Right, but I don't fully buy this because let's take you, for example. You said in the book that you like the appearance of being smart.
Mm.
Now, you didn't say, I like being smart because that gives me power. You just said the appearance. You don't even have to be smart. You just like the appearance. That seems to me to be a purely socially or status oriented desire.
I don't remember saying that in the book.
Okay. Let's just grant you did. Or wait, do you feel as as of now, do you relate to that or you think, no, I don't care about that appearance?
No, I don't care about that appearance.
Uh-huh. But okay, so let's take somebody else who's a well-known
But
psychopath. I think
here, really quickly,
yeah, yeah.
let's pause and kind of talk about this, because I think people think, and maybe this is true of you or maybe you're not, but I think I know it's true of other people. So let's talk about this other people, that when I say things like I am smarter than most of you, I just know that statistically, then I think they think I care about being smart when really I don't. It would be like I saying I have size 8 female feet. That's my shoe size. That's so I think some often people will kind of infer things like I care about stuff that I don't care about. They would care about it, and maybe that's why they think I'm saying it, and it's somehow taboo to say that I'm smarter than most people. That offends people. I have learned from sad experience that
Yes,
that's
yes.
one of the most controversial sentences in the book, actually.
So I remember hearing that, and I
Mm,
thought my first reaction was like, I was taken aback by not by how like arrogant it was, but I was taken aback by how you didn't care to say it. That struck me because most people wouldn't say that, not necessarily out of humility, but out of like the fear of being judged as arrogant by others.
mm,
And that didn't seem to worry you. So I thought that was cool.
mm.
But I don't buy this is where I really don't I can't reconcile what you're saying now with what was said in the book. So here's what I can't reconcile.
Sure.
And I've seen you make this defense. Maybe you're lying to yourself. Maybe you're lying outwardly, or maybe I'm projecting. To me, what seems a blatant inconsistency. Out of all of the true facts you could have stated, you specifically chose that one. Your defense seems to be, well, it's true. Don't infer from the fact that I said it's true that therefore I care. But here's what's interesting. There are potentially millions of facts you could have put there. You could have said, I am shorter than 80% of the people listening. I have black hair. I have a X amount of uh, socks. But no, you chose specifically, out of all the things you could have said, intelligence. So that seems strongly to suggest to me that you do, in fact, care about the
W-
fact that you're more intelligent than others.
Well, I will tell you, and maybe this kind of changes it for you a little bit. I am no longer smart. I am like stupid. My brain has fallen off like a cliff, especially during perimenopause, to where it like barely functions. Like I have to write things down all the time. I used to be able to keep stuff in my head, and my brain has probably aged much more dramatically than somebody who, another person my age. So I'm not smart anymore.
Okay, that seems to be a deliberate red herring.
I don't know what to say, Bob, because I did say, I mean, it is like 200 pages of me just giving facts about myself. I have this many siblings, I have whatever. And so it's not as if it's the one fact that I gave about myself. I gave like all sorts of facts about myself,
Fair
i-
enough, but
including really bad ones. Ones that I'm not proud of, and I wasn't even like didn't even suggest that I was proud of, in the book. Like listen to this horrible thing I did.
okay, but here's what sets that fact aside from the others. The
Mm,
first is the emphasis, because you didn't just say it in the book, you also brought it up in the interview. You're like, it's just a true fact. I score in the 99th percentile for most standardized tests. Twice I didn't, but for the most part I do. So
mm,
the first thing that makes this fact stand out from the others mentioned is the multiple times it was emphasized.
yeah.
But second, and more importantly, is that it it didn't serve any purpose. The other facts stated seem to serve a purpose with respect to a narrative. It would make sense to say, yeah, I am X amount of pounds and I'm X height with respect to an analysis of how you could have physically hurt somebody.
Mm,
Like recall the escalator event. That's where you stated those facts about yourself, and it served a point in a narrative. But just merely stating, "Oh yeah, and I'm much smarter than everyone or most people reading the book," that doesn't. You didn't tie it into any narrative.
mm. Yeah. I mean, I think that it's kind of like being Mormon to me. Like it kind of explains to me some of the idiosyncrasies that I have, even with regard to maybe kind of other psychopaths or like why it is that I was able to get away with the stuff that I was. Because if you take, for instance, my girlfriend, who is still pretty smart, like quite smart, let's say, she got like in trouble, like different types of trouble than I got. And we'll get kind of off her, so so none of these specifics can be traced back to her. But there are other people who are kind of like, like what's the difference between me and some of the psychopaths who are doing similar things who didn't go to jail or who did go to jail, because I didn't go to jail basically for anything of the things I did. But I think one of the reasons why is that, like, for instance, when I would get in trouble at school, have to go talk to the principal, I think it was really hard to kind of reconcile for them. Like, here's somebody who is a national merit scholar, which is like a very small percentage of the population. And they're in my office for bad behavior, and I think there was something about the fact that I was academically so like gifted in a way that I had nothing to do with. Like, it's just a complete coincidence that my intelligence is as high as it is, or that or used to be, not anymore, or that like, there's no way I could score in the 99th percentile on any standardized test now. But I did, at one point. And I think that was a hard thing for people to reconcile with me. I think that was kind of a contradiction for them. And I think that kind of let me off on a lot of things. Like, either that they just didn't want to kind of ruin my potential, like that Stanford swimmer who raped people, but only, did like 6 months in jail or on probation or something. Where they were just kind of like, we can't come down hard on this person because, because of this, like, these kind of academic gifts or whatever that they experience. And so that's like a better way to put it. Like, I'm not smart. I had academic gifts.
Okay, wait. If I were to call you a liar
Yeah.
right now, how would that make you feel?
I would just think, okay. I mean, I'm speaking my truth, and there's no way to control other people's perception of me. Really. That's where I am right now. It's the illusion of control.
Does it bother you that I think you're lying right now?
No. But
Okay.
it's good to know that you think that I'm lying. And that gives me information about you too. That there's something about what I've just told you, my experience, that doesn't resonate with you. And maybe it's because you haven't had, you haven't met people like this before. And maybe you'll change your mind in, 5 years when you have met more people like me. You know what it kind of reminds me of? I have a client, so I have a very unique approach to, let's say, the practice of law. Like, I don't read emails before like 3 p.m. I basically only work between the hours of like 3 and like 5 or 5:30 p.m. And so I was talking to one of my clients about this, and they seemed totally fine with it. I was like, yeah, I'm like more than partially retired. I have these limited things. I'm not going to reply to your voicemails. I'm not going to, like, if something's faster, you need something faster, then text me. They were totally fine with it. And then I found out, like, 6 months into kind of the relationship, that their accountant is the same way, because the accountant was like, "Oh, I'll be in China for like 3 months this summer, and like I won't have internet." And they're like, "Oh, okay." And then I thought, okay, they just are able to accept this about me because they've already accepted it about the accountant. And I think that that happens more than we think, is that people, certain things are easy or easier or less easy for us to accept because we've just had different experiences. We find
Uh,
certain things less credible based on the things that we've had in our own life.
right.
So that's
No,
what I would think about you when you say that I'm a liar.
okay. But the reason I think you're a liar isn't strictly a result of my differentiating experience from yours.
That's what you think, and my thoughts are different.
Okay, that's fine, but I could put in I could put forth in a tangible way
Mm.
why I think you're lying. And in my mind, it's just a matter of addressing the alleged inconsistencies that I see.
Hmm.
If you do so, then I change my mind. If not, I don't see how even you could not expect me to conclude that you're lying. So here's
It's
a
not that I expect you to do anything different. I don't expect you to change your mind about it. You said I'm a liar. I don't expect you to have a different belief about it. I don't expect anything of you. This is your right to discern for yourself your own reality. In my mind, I would never interfere with that.
no, you could. That's not of concern to me. I want to detach from me and you in this
Yeah,
conversation. I just analyze the evidence in favor and against the hypothesis that you're lying,
sure.
just purely as a mental exercise.
Yeah.
So here's the evidence in favor. Um, not only did I recall in the book that you said you like coming across as smart, but I recall even a second time in the book You said that if somebody outwits you, or if someone gets the best of you, or takes advantage of you, or beats you, something to that effect, it doesn't matter as long as in your head you could come up with some sort of gambit where you outwit them.
Hmm,
That was
that
close to
sounds right.
verbatim.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that second thing sounds right. Like, why? Because I told you before, I was primarily interested in like the game of a catch and release game of like, oh, we're all playing this game of whatever it is we're playing, the house of grades or the house of, like which law schools you got into, the house of whatever, and I was like, or like doing really well at music or whatever it was. I wasn't doing it for the sake of, uh,
Wait, wait. I need to
a
lay out
love
the
of
case.
music. Go
Let's
ahead.
let's. So, those are the two things you said in the book that would lead
Hmm.
me to suggest you do care about your intelligence. The third
Oh,
is that you brought it up in the very um early section of the book. You said,
yeah.
"Yeah, I'm probably smarter than most of the readers."
Yeah.
Then the fourth fact was the you repeated that fact. Not only throughout the book did you bring up multiple areas in which you were intelligent, um, but you brought it up in the interview as well.
Hmm.
Um, there were another reason that suggests you do care about your intelligence. Um, you do bring up. Was that there wasn't a narrative that telling the audience about your intelligence served when you brought it up, as opposed to other facts you listed. It was just like stated out of the blue.
Hmm. That's how you remember it.
Mm, well, yeah, later on in the book, you did obviously cite ways in which your intelligence served a narrative, like you said, with respect to not getting in trouble with the law. But earlier in the book, when it was mentioned, it didn't. At that point, it was complete. It definitely was random or appeared to be so.
Hmm.
Then also, you are a psychopath. Psychopaths do lie often, very often. They, I think it's just as a general statement, it is fair to say that psychopaths do care about their perceived intelligence. I think that's a trait that a lot of psychopaths exhibit. Would
Well,
you
you've
say so?
made your case, and now everybody can make their own conclusions.
Wait, but let's detach from me and you. If you heard that case made about any random person, how would you engage with that evidence?
I don't think that evidence is conclusive at all. I think
I didn't
that
say it was
it's
conclusive.
very, very vague and maybe. I'd say maybe. I would say, yeah, there's a possibility that that's true.
Well, a possibility, that's trivially true. There's almost everything is possibly the case, but and I'm not concluding confidently. Therefore, you're lying. I think, however, this suggests probably that you are lying and you do care about your intelligence.
And people can make their own assessments about that. You've presented your evidence, and they can say, hey, what percentage do I think it is that she's lying?
Okay. Um, and then also, it seems when I brought up the fact that you cared about your intelligence, you engaged in what seemed like an apology for your intelligence. You're like, well, I'm not intelligent anymore.
That's just true.
Right, but its truth is not what I'm pointing out. Its service is what I'm pointing out, and that serves to emotionally comfort anyone who you would have made uncomfortable with stating your intelligence. No.
I don't think so. I don't know why people are kind of obsessed with intelligence. I really don't. I don't value it myself. You know what it kind of reminds me of is that I also say in the book that I have unusually beautiful breasts, like remarkably beautiful. And the reason why I say this is because when people have seen them, they will remark upon it. They will say, "Hey, like one time, one of my friends were like changing in the same room, and she's like, "Wow, you have '80s porn star breasts." Right? That's the remark she gave. And then other people have made other remarks about it, like, wow, you have great breasts, or, like whatever the thing is. Now, most people, when the book came out, I got a bunch of like, responses from a bunch of people, like, including my old law school classmates. One of them was like, I never would have thought that your breasts were anything to remark on. And I was like, okay. Like, does that mean that they're less remarkable or something? I don't know. I'll let you all decide. You guys can all choose, given the information that some people have remarked upon them, and then this other person didn't. Now she never saw them, so you can also make your your determination. The classmate who was like, I wouldn't have said that your breasts were anything to remark about. She never saw them, so I don't know.
Well, I would think that the repeated emphasis of that fact is evidence of one caring about that fact.
I've heard you say that. You've made that argument.
What do you think of that?
I it's not compelling to me because I don't experience that. I don't experience the frequency with which I mention something to be the fact that I care about it. I actually think that I mean, part of it's probably people pleasing. Part of it's probably like, what are people going to think is more interesting? Certainly it's that, like with regard to like the way that the book's written, is that you're like, should I write this boring or should I try to write it interesting? You know?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so putting that aside, another area that I found to be inconsistent was the part where you talked about your dad breaking down the bathroom door and the effect that had on you.
Yeah.
So here's what I found inconsistent. Um, as you were describing it in the from the perspective of the bathroom, you were saying you didn't feel what I'm going to call emotional fear. You felt a bodily fear, like your adrenaline increased. Your I don't think you said your palms were sweating, but tunnel vision. You did say that your tunnel vision began to increase.
Like a
That sort.
metallic taste in my mouth,
No,
something
that
like
that
that.
that you said about the gray rage.
Mm.
Um, so you described a bodily fear, but you specifically said you don't think you were emotionally scared at all, and if you were, maybe a tiny bit. So what I find inconsistent with that was that weeks or even months later, you then went and destroyed that door, and then you wrote you destroyed it, the very door that caused you like fear and anxiety. And I thought that's very odd. If somebody wasn't in fear, then number one, they wouldn't feel any sentimental negativity toward an object in that environment, such that months later they'd gain satisfaction from destroying it. That
Yeah.
struck me as odd. And then you also later described your destroying of that door as satisfactory, specifically because it had caused negative fear and anxiety in you.
Yeah,
So,
I agree. That sounds inconsistent.
so how would you say you felt during that episode? Were you scared? Were you
Fearful.
not?
Yeah.
You were.
Yeah.
Does it hurt you or make you negative? Do you experience some sort of negative emotion?
Yeah,
Quote,
fear.
admitting that you like, does it bother you that you were fearful? Does that bother you?
No.
Really? I mean, isn't fear a sort of lack of control?
Yeah, it is. I don't
That-
like lack of control.
So doesn't it
Traditionally,
so doesn't it bother you that you were fearful?
it doesn't bother me that I was fearful. It bothers me that I was lack of control.
But being fearful is a kind of lack of control.
I don't know that I would agree with that. Fearful. I was fearful because I was in a lack of control. I don't know if the fear, having the emotion, makes me even less control.
Right, right. Fair enough, fair enough.
Okay.
Um, okay. Oh, here was another inconsistency. This one I really liked.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this one was my favorite because it was blatant. I really appreciated this one.
Yeah.
You said that your friend had cancer, and
Yes.
that in the book you said that you abandoned them because the cost benefit analysis to continue the friendship was disadvantageous for you.
Yeah.
But in an interview, you said that you took a break from the friend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is it?
So in like I had like this text conversation, I think it was. I was in Hawaii with a friend, and the friend was kind of being like, oh yeah, my dad or whatever. And I kind of was like, I think I like pushed back a little bit on, being like, I don't have like a really strong memory of this, but the essential drift was like, I was like, you have allowed your father's illness to disrupt your life to an extent that it's like it's difficult for you maybe, but it's difficult for me too to be your friend. And the friend was like, that's really offensive for you to say, and it's my dad is dying. And then my friend was like, if that's how you feel or whatever, then or something like of the nature. We ended up not being friends. And then like about like 18 months, like a year and a half later, I think she reached out and told me that her dad had died, or I'd heard from mutual friends. And then, like over the period of like 6 to 9 months, a year or something, we started texting a little bit more frequently, and now we're friends.
Okay. Let's just say generally, if an author ex demonstrates an inconsistency,
You know
what is
what's the
that?
biggest inconsistency, Bob? I'm going to interrupt you and say the biggest inconsistency is that later in the book, I say that I was not abused as a child. And that's inconsistent with all the stories of abuse that I told. So if you
Well,
think that I'm like somehow unafraid to claim to admit that there are inconsistencies in my story, that's the biggest inconsistency. I'm surprised you haven't mentioned that one.
okay. I actually, when I read that, I thought, here's how to reconcile it. I thought
You don't
the
have to reconcile it, but if you want to, go ahead.
well, yeah, no, I
It's
don't
just
have to.
weird that you decide to reconcile to me. It's weird. It's weird that you decide to reconcile this one, but the other ones you're like, "Oh, this is crazy." Like what do you think is what's the point of like pointing out the inconsistencies? Do you
Right,
want to
right,
learn, or are
right.
you trying to make it seem as if like authors shouldn't be inconsistent?
No,
Because
no, no.
there's a lot of plot holes in some of my favorite movies too
Oh,
that bother
100%.
me.
100%. So, that's what I was trying to get. That's what I
Or
was
you
trying
know
to get at.
what? Like when people have like their hair back or they're holding a drink and then in the next scene they're not holding the drink. Yeah,
Right.
that is really frustrating. I can see how that's so frustrating.
Right. So, what I was trying to get what I was trying to get at with with my question about inconsistencies generally was
Hmm.
that they're not at all a negative thing necessarily. Inconsistencies can occur for a whole host of reasons, obviously.
Okay,
So,
these are your thoughts.
right. So, with respect to the inconsistency of going through abuse and saying you weren't abused, I thought, okay, well, in the beginning of the book, the abuse you listed definitionally meets the criteria for abuse, but in your mind, I would think abuse is something that very negatively emotionally impacts somebody, and you don't feel as though that happened to you, so you didn't categorize it as abuse.
Hmm.
But even if that's completely not the case, which it probably isn't, let's just put that aside. Inconsistencies in general, to me, are interesting. They indicate a potential variety of different things. So you're obviously a lawyer, and if you were, I don't know what a lawyer is exactly. I don't know what that entails, but I'm sure if you were interviewing some sort of criminal and his story was inconsistent, that would suggest to you. Actually, it would depend on the inconsistency, right? It could suggest a variety of things. It could suggest nothing. It could suggest that he's telling the truth, and it could actually suggest he's lying. It would depend on the case. So, for example, I've heard that the FBI has this interrogation tactic where if two partners in crime have a perfectly consistent story, that's a sign of lying.
Hmm.
Um, we would expect, given how the memory works, that there would be inconsistency in small irrelevant details, right? One suspect says they were going 25 miles per hour, the other says 28. That's expected. So if there's no inconsistency, that's uh, indication of thought out lie and a constructive narrative. If there's
According to law
incons-
enforcement that you've read.
I Yes, but I would say I don't need the law enforcement to have said that. It prima facie seems obvious that if a story is perfectly consistent between two people in small details, that is sign of deliberate construction of that story.
I disagree with you
Okay,
But keep going, I guess.
fine. Now in big details, obviously, I think we both agree an inconsistency is indication of deceit, right? If I say I punched person X, and then later when I'm more
No, I
cornered, I
don't
say,
agree with you about that. I don't agree. And it's crazy that you're like, to me, it's crazy that you're like, inconsistencies are a sign of deceit, but only when I think that they're material. Oh, okay.
well, that's not exactly what I said. What I'm
I'm
saying
just
is,
saying, like, you're making your case, but these are your thoughts. They're your thoughts. They're not my thoughts. I'm not going to agree with you. And you're presenting the case to everybody else who's going to, either agree or not agree with you. And that's just what it is. That's what the lawyer in me thinks is the jury will decide. I can have my own opinions and they're my own. And they're the only things I control because I only control my own thoughts and my own perspectives. And if you don't find something persuasive, that's what happens to me in the jury too. I've had jury trials go against me and I'm like, shoot, dang it. Lost that one.
okay, but if you would find an inconsistency in someone's story, what does that indicate to you?
I would just ask about it, you know? And that's kind of the interesting thing talking to you about it is you seem to me like the inconsistency. You've said the word inconsistency like 50 times, you
Right.
know? And that is the thing that I've heard you talk about. I haven't heard you kind of ask open-ended questions so much as resolving inconsistencies.
Well,
And that's
you
fine. That's your choice. It's your time, it's your life, you know. But then to kind of expect other people to be agreeing with you, if you do, and you've asked me, we can both agree about this, you've asked me that like 5, 6, 7 times or whatever. And no, I'm part of me is just kind of like, now I don't want to agree with you because I almost feel it as an infringement of my personhood that you seem to almost be imposing your own worldview on me so hard and telling me that I'm a liar when I give you my worldview.
well, the evidence, as I said, suggested that it's probable that you were lying.
That's what you think, Bob. And I'm telling you, everybody else can conclude their own things based on. Yeah, I let you give all the evidence. We'll just have to see what other people think.
I think if independent of who is laying it out, if I just saw on paper the
If
evidence
you
I'd laid out,
saw, if you saw, you'd make the conclusion. We get that. That's your thought. That's your conclusion.
I would think that a rational agent would do that as well.
That's probably because you assume that you're a rational agent and that everybody would agree with you if they're a rational agent.
So if you don't think so, what's the rationale for that?
For all the reasons that I've given you. Like, I just don't think your evidence is compelling
For what reason?
because it's just not strong. You just have said, like, what is the evidence is that I didn't at first you said this, that I said that I like the appearance of being smart, which thing I never did say. Then you said, well, here's why I thought it. And then I was like, well, I'm just telling you that I never did. And now I'm telling you that I don't care about being smart and that I'm surprised anybody cares about being smart. Like, I care about it in the terms of like it has gotten me several privileges. And
Right.
then you're like, no, no, you really care about this. I mean, you could call me stupid.
No, I don't think you're stupid.
Well, you can say I'm not smart and it would not bother me because I don't care what you think.
Okay.
But I do feel like my personhood is getting kind of violated with you being like you think the same thing that I do. I don't like that. That's the thing that I don't like. If you were kind of like, yeah, you can think whatever you want, Jamie, then I'd be like, okay, yeah, thanks. Good. All right, let's continue or whatever. The assumption that I would think the same as you
I
is
don't
hard for
I'm
me.
I'm not seeing the personhood violation. I'm not
I
seeing it.
get it. I get it. And I feel it probably because I'm super sensitive to it.
Okay, I guess I did not take that into account. No, you're right that if I was talking to a non-psychopath, I would not have said, look, I was operating on the assumption that you were very much detached and that it wouldn't feel like a personal violation at all in any way. And it would just be like me reciting random facts that we could both examine together. But I
And you
totally
made
agree.
that assumption.
No, and apparently that assumption was a completely false one.
Well,
But
is it completely false? Do you want to hear the real story? Or
Oh
do
yeah,
you
well,
think I'm a liar?
I don't think with confidence you're a liar, but I do think the evidence suggests that.
Okay. And that's okay to think. And it's okay to share it with me. It's the part that feels bad to me is when you assume that I would think the way that you do, and also that you say to me, it's fine for you to think it, but when you say to me like a rational actor would agree with you, what is that saying? That my worldview is not rational. That's how I
Um,
interpret it.
okay. No, I'm
Which feels
just
badly because I want to keep my self conception, my worldview. That's part of my personhood and my own experience. And maybe you disagree with me. I've had people like on Reddit, somebody was like, that's not at all part of your personhood or whatever.
right.
And it's fine for you to disagree, but I guess that's why I'm bothered by it. I don't like that when the idea is that it's not an attack on my ideas. It's like it feels like an attack on the validity of my worldview. You know what I'm saying? If you attacked my views, then you did it before, right? And I was totally fine. It was like, oh, and here are all of the reasons why I think you're a liar. I was like, fine, But then it's like when I said to you, Bob, like that's your thoughts, then you were like, that should be everybody's thoughts. That's the rational actor thought.
Right.
And I think that's the stepping over the line. Everything else was fine. Go ahead and
Okay.
attack me, attack my ideas. But when you try to say there's one way of seeing this, right, and it's my way, then that's the part to me that says no, because that's what I experienced so much as a child from my dad, my narcissistic dad, who was like, there's one way of seeing this right, and it's my way. And I just felt it was so oppressive. I am so sensitive to that because of that. I have
Okay,
gotten
so
so hurt because of that, so psychologically damaged that I live like a shell of a life and I still struggle every day with some of the consequences of that.
okay, so I definitely want to apologize. I admit that if I was talking to a average person, I would not have at all employed employed the tactics I did now.
Mm-hmm.
They're definitely insensitive. I've always been told that I'm very insensitive. But I did not tone it down because I apparently was under the misapprehension that psychopaths do not care about those sorts of violations.
Mm.
So that was a big misunderstanding.
Yeah, no
Um,
worries. No
yeah, yeah,
problem. Well, now that I've explained myself to you, I mean, I didn't do like, you don't really have to apologize. Like, I didn't tell you that that's like a problem. Now that I've told you, though, um, then yeah, I probably will enforce that as a personal boundary. But
fair
totally
enough,
fine
fair
that,
enough.
yeah,
But and also in the beginning, before we started the recording, I did tell you that I love getting hard questions. I like being pressed. I
yes,
like being called out. To me,
sure.
that's enjoyable. It's exciting. So I don't view you with the same sensitivity that I have for others. So I thought whatever I allow on myself, I could do to you, but apparently that was completely mistaken.
Well,
So I
I mean, some people maybe are fine with you saying, no, this is the only rational way to view things. That's really the only thing that bothered me.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, look, if someone said that to me, I would be like, okay, why do you think that? I would experience no personal violation, but I live a very different life than you. I didn't go through the same childhood trauma you did. So I totally understand the difference there.
All right.
Fair enough. Okay, so let's see. What else did I want to ask you about? Oh yeah, fear. Your relationship to fear. So let's start with the most extreme case with death. What do you think of death? How do you feel toward death?
I mean, honestly, and this is kind of a family trait, so I don't know if this has to do with being a psychopath. Like most people in my family have like a very warm view of death and the sweet embrace of death. Did I just say most people in my family? At least several, especially my brothers for whatever reason.
Uh-huh. So let's say you knew you were going to die tomorrow.
Yeah.
And let's stipulate there's nothing you could do about it. You're dying tomorrow.
Yeah.
Upon hearing that news, how do you feel?
I mean, my thoughts immediately go to enjoying the things that I like. Like I'd probably just drive to Disneyland, eat a bunch of churros.
Whoa. You wouldn't feel down?
No.
Really?
Yeah. Part of
What?
it's I feel existence a little bit as a burden.
Okay, I do relate to that,
Yeah.
but if death wouldn't make you feel depressed or down, what would?
I mean, like losing my partner. Probably, I mean, like the usual things. You know how they say that, like, oh, up to like, and this is, American dollars or whatever, like up to $86,000 or something, then like there's a steep increase in happiness. So I think
Yeah,
about,
yeah.
yeah, like losing kind of like the creature comforts or something. Like it's been hard to go through perimenopause. Like it's disrupted my sleep. It's like sometimes I'll wake up like with like a little bit of anxiety that I don't know where it's coming from. Like it has no kind of point. I guess that's anxiety in general or whatever, is you just experience it as I think of it as like a physical symptom. Um yeah, like a lack of engagement. Like I've always had kind of like a lack of engagement with the world, but I've experienced more with perimenopause, the hormonal changes.
Uh-huh. Um,
So that's actually gotten worse, like my attachment to life and seeing life as a burden.
oh,
I
I
think
see.
that's I think that's common though for people to like as they age in a way, like, but it's kind of like getting stupider too. Is that I've also gotten more experience, so like intelligence just means less in general. Like would my clients rather have like somebody who's like, in their 20s or something and just as smart, as they were before or something, so smarter than me now? I don't know. They choose me, so whatever.
Okay. What about fear? So you said that you found yourself almost getting run over by a train,
Oh, yeah.
and
Because I live by trains right now.
right. And when you experience fear, it sounds almost entirely like a bodily reaction, almost like like going to the bathroom is not an emotional state. Your body is doing something, whether you like it or not.
Hmm.
So it sounds like that's the way you experience fear. You just find your body needing to like release adrenaline or sweat, or your heart rate needs to go up. But you sound very detached from your fear. Is that correct?
I mean, I would say so. Like when I feel fear, it doesn't feel necessarily negative, is maybe like a good way to put it. Like I'm aware that like my reptilian brain is like fearful. There's bodily reactions. But to me, it doesn't feel like it really gets to my heart. It doesn't feel like I don't take it personally, might be a good way to put it. Like I can sense the thing, and maybe, like you've made a good point. Did I feel fear with my dad? Yeah. Was it mostly bodily reactions? Yeah, but there must have been something there too, because psychological, because like months later, I took the sledgehammer to the door.
Right.
I think that's actually kind of consistent though with the weak sense of self, because it's not as if there's not a sense of self there, and like what obviously people are pissing me off during gray rage, obviously people are like able to still kind of trigger me and have like a sense that my personhood is under threat.
Uh-huh. Um, so if you would watch horror movies, do you like horror movies?
No, actually, but my girlfriend really does. But I wonder too if that's a family trait because her whole family does.
Uh, how do you feel toward horror movies? Just like disinterest, or you specifically don't like them?
It's not that I don't like them. I guess I kind of don't enjoy them. Because I'm kind of like the jump scares do not thrill me. And then the rest of it often just seems like a little bit gratuitous, where I'm like, oh, okay, will like this disrupt my sleep now that I've seen that this is what people can do to other people? Will my brain take this and run with it or something like in my dreams? And like now that I know this is a possibility, like this is just another thing to like be concerned about happening to me, like, oh, don't, do this at night when the blah blah blah, etc.
Okay. Um, so that I'm glad I got that done with the relationship to fear, because that's very interesting. Most people, when they think of psychopathy, they think of cruelty and lack of empathy, but not they don't necessarily think of the interesting relationship to fear that psychopaths have, which I think that's an understated quality of a psychopath, because if psychopaths experience fear in the way you do, then it becomes very clear that psychopaths can be of tremendous help towards society if society takes into account the utility the psychopath has in that regard, and makes it easier for the psychopath to help themselves and others given their sort of lack of fear.
Yeah.
So, an example that comes to mind is, I know that when it comes to um, certain jobs, there's a higher rate of psychopathy, like being a firefighter or a police officer, where there is a fairly regular fear aspect that one has to overcome if they want to be a regular participant in that job. So I wonder what society would look like if, instead of stigmatizing and trying to punish psychopaths, because that's what it seems like society's interested in doing, I wonder what it would look like if they took into account the pros of the psychopath and maybe made jobs specifically for them, or just made it easier for psychopaths to get access to already existent jobs where psychopathy is advantageous. What do you think of that?
So I do think that, especially in the moment, the psychopath, I think the fear is not felt negatively. But I do know of a psychopath who was in an elite uh, army, navy, whatever military division, and then was a sniper within that elite division, and probably has a kill count at least in the double digits. Is my impression. And that person experiences PTSD now. So they're a psychopath who experiences PTSD, but I think at the time they didn't think that that was troubling to them. And that's actually kind of consistent with like some of my experiences, where even like some of the, like things that I didn't hurt somebody about. Like I went to a timpani camp in Colorado during college, and I had like $126. That was like the top amount. So I was like, well, I haven't booked my hotel or whatever, so I can't get a hotel. So I just need to show up, and hopefully it's on campus. Maybe I can just like sleep like in the basement of some dorm or something. And that was like literally the plans that I had made was maybe I'll just sleep in some dorm or whatever. And that type of attitude now shocks me. When I remember that particular thing, I think I can't believe that I did that. Like I had no fear about that, or no kind of like, even just kind of like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this because I will experience this negatively, to suffer if I'm sleeping in a dorm, for this week thing. Like it was a totally optional thing. I wanted to do it, but it's not like, it changed my life. Well, it changed my life a little bit, but it's not like it was so important or something, but it was just like, it's like shocking more to me to look at some of those past experiences and be like, why wasn't I bothered by that? Why didn't I seem to experience things negatively? I think is like more helpful even than thinking about the idea of fear. But I have another thought about this. So that's one thing, which I think is kind of consistent with, like, again, the weak sense of self, where there is a sense of self there. You're just not aware of it, especially not in the moment, especially if your attention is not drawn to that thing in the moment. It's just kind of like, it's as if the thing doesn't exist. Like you have such an ability to compartmentalize that it's as if the fear doesn't exist, although the fear probably is there and is affecting you psychologically, as you have mentioned before. The other thing that I have thought about is there is some research that Buddhist monks, have like a similar low startle response to psychopaths. So I think that's interesting because it's not just like the psychological effect of fear, but also that psychopaths tend to have a low startle response to fear responses, like a gunshot or something, like lower than other people, let's say, and that monks too share this low startle response. The crazy thing about this is that they've also done this with the monks. Psychopaths usually, or at least in studies, these studies now are kind of like 2 decades old, so maybe they need some refreshing, especially with the, what do we call it? The psychology replication crisis.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so caveat some of these, but psychopaths are able to see people walking and identify people who are kind of would be victims, and that's kind of famously Ted Bundy said that about his would be victims, is you can kind of tell, like if somebody made eye contact with him, then she wasn't the one. It had to be like a particular sort of body posture, the way that they walk, etc. But that also monks, trained monks, are also able to do this, is to pick out the would-be victims. And I think it's kind of interesting too, because the capacity, like nobody thinks of monks as being like, oh, now we need to really be worried about monks, since they're able to pick out the people who are like, the would-be victims. uh yeah, and it's just interesting because it seems to be something that you can train. But it also is interesting because kind of famously Buddhism is about the and I hate to misquote Buddhism about this, but my understanding is that a lot of what you try to do is realize the extent to which there's an illusion of self, or the attachment to self from which we suffer.
Uh-huh. Um, that was related to psychopaths. In what
Fear.
way? Fear. Um, okay. Oh, yeah, okay. So that is related closely to another point of interest, which was, I think I'm getting this right, but I'm not certain of that. And that is, you said in the book there was some famous psychologist who was hypothesizing that psychopaths have all of the normal inputs, but they're differentiated by normal people, given a differentiation in emphasis. So they have the same inputs as people, but they don't put an emphasis on that. And they put attention, say, on um maybe like non, for lack of a better word, empathetic aspects of experiences.
Hmm.
Do you remember what I'm referring to, or not really?
No. I mean, I have seen, like, I guess I can speak briefly to a couple things, like the characteristics of the psychopaths. Maybe this is what I said, like in the book, that it's like the dials are just different. Like it's the same kind of basic personality characteristics about like this or that, or this ability or that ability. And normal people can be like part-time psychopaths, like if they feel like they're under threat or whatever else. And the empathy can be kind of used kind of selectively, let's say, for them too, especially if somebody's in the out group. I think there's evidence that shows that uh, that non-psychopaths experience very low empathy in certain situations. Is that what you're talking about, dials?
Um, what it may be what prompted what I said, but in my mind, what I'm referring to is the ability to make yourself feel emotions.
Mm.
Um, this is my impression. I could be entirely mistaken, but my impression is that psychopaths have a very different relationship than normal people with respect to making themselves feel a certain way. It almost seems like psychopaths have goal oriented emotions as opposed to just emotions. Do you relate to that?
I think that there is a different way that psychopaths relate to their emotions. I don't know that I would describe it as goal oriented, but I think that there is, and I actually think some of this research is some of the better research about psychopaths, and research that I think, we should investigate more, like this idea of attention. And I think of it, I think I talk about this in the book, like those old black and white cartoons where they're like escaping from jail and they have the spotlight that's shining, and the spotlight is like the only thing that you can see, the rest of the screen's black. Then when the spotlight's here, then you can see the thing, but when you move over here, it's in the black and it's as if the thing doesn't exist. And I think that's what the emotions feel like, to me. If my attention's on them, then I experience them. If it's not, then it's like it kind of gets into this ability to compartmentalize. And I do think psychopaths, especially as they kind of get older, can control that to a certain degree. They can kind of take the spotlight and put it on something else in order to stop feeling a particular emotion or worry or concern. Like they're very good at compartmentalizing.
Yeah. That is what I was getting at. That,
Yeah.
thank you. The word is compartmentalized. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, I have this very weird characteristic where I could, if I decide I want to have certain emotions, I could create them.
Mm.
And if I find myself having emotions, I could get rid of them. And I've met some people that have that as well. So if, for example, I feel empathy towards someone, I could think to myself, is this empathy sort of rational? Does it serve a purpose that I agree is necessary? If yes, then I feel it. And if I go, actually, no, it doesn't make sense for me to feel empathy, then it sort of like goes away. And I could do that with almost all of my emotions. Is that something related to psychopathy? Is that something psychopaths have, or is that just something else entirely?
That's interesting. I kind of wish, and my girlfriend Aria also, that now my emotions, now that I've gotten like a stronger sense of self, they're harder for me to control. So I think that it's probably different, but maybe something that I could learn from you is that before it used to be like attention, and now that I'm like more in touch with my sense of self, like it's harder for me to compartmentalize because I'm more kind of in tune with like, oh, but what about this? I know it's like when they say don't think pink elephant, and that's like the thing that you keep thinking about, pink elephant. That's more my experience now of my emotions, is that it is hard for me to like not manage them, but to kind of contextualize them. And I almost think it's because I don't have the same amount of experience that other people do. Like I haven't for decades been experiencing my emotions, in a very direct, personal way, like taking them personally. And so now it's only been like about a decade that I have been, and I'm still trying to learn. And then once you figure it out or whatever, you go through perimenopause or something. So I'm still trying to kind of learn how to kind of like, I have a tendency to compulsively think. And I think that combined with experiencing emotions has been a hard thing. So I don't know. Like I would say it's a different mechanism. The thing that you're describing, it does sound like it's kind of similar to what I used to do with the compartmentalizing, in that you can kind of take your attention and put it on the thing, but it sounds like you're kind of doing something different where it's not intentional. It's more like almost like you're introducing a rational element, like you're rationalizing the emotions. And I guess that is probably like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. It kind of sounds like that is what people do in CBT, is that you kind of take the emotional experiences and kind of put them through a rational filter and then see if you can kind of eliminate them. But it sounds like you're doing it on a different level than most people are doing in CBT.
Yeah, I really wonder what that is, because I've been accused of being psychopathic a lot, but
Mm.
I'm confident that I'm not a psychopath because I definitely can feel every emotion, empathy, guilt, these sorts of things. However, I find that those emotions and almost all of my emotions are almost entirely at the mercy of my goals. That's why I asked about goal-oriented emotions.
Mm.
It's very weird for me. Like, for example, my neighbor died like a few years ago and I was pretty close with him. And I went through the weirdest experience ever. And I could have this right now. If I want right now, I could tell myself, my neighbor's a loser. I don't care about him. That's hilarious that he died. And I could actually find it funny and be uplifted by the fact that he died.
Huh.
Like, I'm being brutally honest. And if I wanted to, I could say, well, actually, right now, it's very important that I be an empathetic and nice person. And I connect to him, and my connection to others is important, and I feel down and I feel a loss and I feel saddened. And I could completely flip-flop between the two, almost spontaneously. So what on earth do you think that is?
That's a really interesting question. This is the first I've heard about something like this. I wonder if like maybe people can like post in the comments or something if they've had similar experiences, and maybe we can get on again and like explore this. I have never heard of it before. It's interesting.
Yes, I've never met someone with that experience, and I was kind of hoping that this would be something you would resonate with as a psychopath, so then I could get a deeper understanding of it. But my intuition was always that no, this is not psychopath related, because psychopaths just, as you said, just lack this guilt and empathy thing. And for me, it's not that I lack it. It's just like it doesn't. It almost never happens to me by accident. I just sort
Hmm.
of choose like a buffet. I just like, yeah, empathy, guilt. Yeah, let's do that given X. Um, and it's so prevalent throughout my life. In fact, it could even be more starkly present than even some people with psychopathy. So I know people with psychopathy tend to have a certain closeness or love or sensitivity toward their family that they
Hmm.
generally do not have with strangers. So you definitely described that in the book. Is that correct?
Yeah, like with my, well, even I guess now it's different, but yeah, you'd have like um more of a personal connection, yeah, to people that are more like the generically close to you, I guess, like genetically close,
Yeah.
environmentally close.
So what's really weird, and this in a way is more psychopathic than psychopaths, that isn't the case for me at all.
Hmm.
I've decided many times that like my parents or family members are annoying or need to be destroyed or whatever my goal was. And I can just given a thought like that, like I could wake up today and say, okay, you know what? I want to be a good lawyer. Everything else that gets in my way is a rat and a parasite.
Hmm.
And instantly I will not like my family. So that yeah, that's a very strange characteristic to have at while being capable of empathy and closeness. So I really wonder what that is.
Yeah. Can I say something that kind of troubles me about this?
Yeah.
It does seem like the thing that would be like it seems very powerful, but in some ways it also seems like to the extent that emotions often act as a reality check, it almost sounds like you would be like a little bit like these people who don't experience pain. And so then are kind of like unaware sometimes of the fact that their, body's on fire or whatever.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I have a ridiculous history of injuries.
Hmm.
I always push myself far beyond the point of normalcy, and I'm in and out of the hospital all the time.
Hmm.
Like, um, but yeah, that's it's not apparently it's not related to psychopathy. So I really wonder what that is.
Yeah.
Um, okay.
I'll be thinking
Oh, and
about that though, and everybody else can chime in on this. The idea of what did you call it? Goal oriented emotional experience is
yeah, yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
And you don't even necessarily have to choose the goal. If it just happens to be the goal, I bet you probably naturally kind of
Right,
so sort of self select without even doing it consciously.
right. Um, Another oddity, and I wonder if this is related to psychopathy or you relate to this in general or not. But I find you said that your sense of self and psychopath's sense of self is often informed by environment. Is that correct?
I don't know what you mean by that. Informed by environment. Oh, like
Water, like water. Remember the analogy you gave of water? You put water in a cup, it takes that form of a cup. Or you also gave the analogy of a chameleon.
yeah, 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 yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think yeah, because I don't think of myself, as being a particular type of person, let's say shy or something. So I can be outgoing or shy if I want to.
Right. So relatedly, I find myself having that with my emotional response toward others.
Yeah, that's
Like
interesting.
I've seen, for example, an interview, I've seen many interviews with psychopaths, and they'll say something like, oh, yeah, I walked into a house on this and this street, killed the occupants, and left. No big
Hmm.
deal. And in my mind, I'm like, well, to him, it's not a big deal. So, yeah, I guess it's not a big deal. And to me, it doesn't strike me as at all problematic.
Hmm.
But but then, in an entirely inconsistent way, I'll then go and watch like the victims, and they'll be like crying and oh, it was traumatizing and it was terrible and and I'll feel all those feelings. I'll feel empathy. I'll feel the loss of that person. I'll feel badly. So I almost feel like my emotions don't have, in the same way that a psychopath doesn't have like a sense of self, I
Hmm.
feel like I don't have a sense of emotional regulation
Hmm.
that that exists absent a context. And
That's interesting.
it's so confusing because of that. Like, I'll find myself being completely indifferent or even sadistic if I'm around those sorts of people. And then I'll be completely emotional, responsive, and sympathetic and kind if I'm around those sorts of people as well.
Yeah.
You've ne- you've never heard of this kind of thing?
No, but you know what it kind of reminds me of? It's a total analogy. You'll see why in a second. Have you seen the movie Memento?
No.
I think you would enjoy watching it because he has like amnesia because he gets a brain injury or something where it's like every 8 minutes he resets. He can remember from before the accident, but he can't remember anything after 8 minutes. Then he forgets or whatever, and so he has to kind of just rely on himself. You know, like he'll put tattoos on or put a bunch of post-it notes to kind of try to remember or have like a through line, you know, of like, you know, this is still kind of like who I am or what I'm doing or a through line to anything. And that's what like it almost reminds me of like it seems like it would be a little disorienting to experience that because the same kind of idea, there's a lack of through line, you know, through your experience.
Exactly. There isn't a consistent emotional narrative.
Yeah.
Um, so another thing I wanted to ask about was, let me see. Oh, highly emotional people.
Hmm.
I think in the book you described a bewilderment and maybe even an irritation and an inability to understand highly emotional people.
Yeah. And especially like people who get caught up in like mob mentality or whatever, which is a lot of people. That's probably most people, you know, 85%. It kind of seems like they freak me out even. Like they seem unpredictable to me. And because I like predictability because it gives the illusion of control,
Right.
then I don't like the unpredictability of highly emotional people.
Do you think it's a general theme that psychopaths don't get along with or generally dislike highly emotional people?
I think this kind of gets to this idea of like the narcissistic people and like you know the little kid with the train dinosaur whatever trucks or something where some of them like the highly emotional people and will seek after them because of the stimulation. You know, it's like you're constantly like you know, it's like people who like to ski down like a groomed slope versus people who like to ski down moguls, you know, because it's dangerous
Right.
and unpredictable and I guess exciting. Same thing with horror films, I guess.
Do you struggle getting along with highly emotional people?
I do. I don't respect their emotional worlds that much because I think that like if they are experiencing emotions like that with regard to just like simple little things, it in my mind cheapens their emotional experience. It's like dilutes it, you know, like well you're upset about this, but you're upset about everything. So why why should I be upset about the fact that you're upset?
Do you feel anger toward highly emotional people?
Sometimes, especially when I had like less of a sense of self myself, you know, like people cry, I'd be angry, I'd be like, this is manipulative because I had no other context, you know, for my own emotions. You know, if I had cried, then I would have thought, yeah, it was basically it was projecting. You know, if I had cried, I would have been like doing it for manipulative reasons, probably, or in my mind, that's what I thought at the time. And then so seeing them do it, be like, okay, I can see you're trying to do like cheap tricks of manipulating me.
So do you have advice for people that have a hard time getting along with and or get very angry at highly emotional people? How do you deal with that rage? Relatedly, how do you deal with your gray rage?
Mm. So I think gray rage is like something, and I experienced this too. Oddly, like the one of the more overwhelming emotions, my own emotions I experience is disappointment, and often it's like disappointment and kind of like I it's something that cannot be fixed. I think that I feel those sorts of losses like more strongly. Like you're like this happened to me recently, and it's such a stupid story. So you're going to like going on a particular little tour, like a little bus tour at the zoo, and showing up at like 4:01, and the line for the bus tour closes at 4, and then I'll be like, we shouldn't have spent so long at the snakes, you know. And then I just had to sit down and be like grumpy for like 8 minutes. But I also know that, and this is kind of why I say, you know, in some ways that I envy you, I guess, a little bit about your ability to kind of just like tap into like a different emotional channel than the one that you're currently experiencing. Like use rationality to just kind of choose. Because I don't know how to get out of those moods. Like I just will be like that for like the next 30 to 45 minutes, and it's almost like my it feels like my body just needs to process through the emotions. Even if I can get right mentally, like I still feel like the flood of whatever has gone through my body. I kind of forgot what your question is, and I feel like I've gotten off a little bit.
Okay. Well, so the question, you didn't answer the question, but what you said was
Hmm.
very interesting nonetheless. The question was twofold. One, how do you have any advice for people that struggle getting along with highly emotional people
Mm,
or anger? And the second question was relatedly, how do you deal with your gray rage? How do you mitigate it?
yeah,
But what you just said that I found very interesting was you were saying it seems the emotion that does cause you a lot of trouble is disappointment.
yeah. Yeah, and gray
So,
rage. Those are the two strong ones. And same with gray rage. I just have to like let it be for like an hour, a day, or 2 days.
right. So, similar to that, and that this is why I'm asking for advice or any tips you have in dealing with rage or not getting along with highly emotional people. The
Hmm.
one emotion that I have no control over, no matter what I do, and I'm very prone to this emotion, is just a insane level of rage.
Hmm.
And it does not go away. And I hold grudges for 10, 15 years, no problem, for minor things. Someone stepped on my toe. I
Hmm.
remember exactly where it was. I remember what they said. And I want revenge, and I will get revenge when the opportunity presents itself. I will not forget.
Yeah.
I have like a mental list of people that wronged me.
Hmm.
And and also I experience tremendous rage in dealing with highly emotional people,
Mm,
which is somewhat oxymoronic because I don't know if that's a word, but they themselves, like, I'm doing what I hate when
hmm.
because hate is a very strong emotion and it's sort of irrational. So, for example, my sister comes into my room, I'm like, get out. And she gets offended that I'm ordering her to get out and she freaks out. And I get furious that she's being highly emotional,
Yeah.
which is what I'm mad at her for doing. But yeah, relatedly, how do you deal with your gray rage and how do you deal with your sensitivity to feeling let down?
Yeah. So I think for those, I think, yeah, try to, as much as possible, rationalize it. Be like, we can come back to the zoo. In fact, we'll come back tomorrow or something. Sometimes it helps to think, you know, like I've had these feelings before about stuff that I don't even remember anymore. You know, that helps to contextualize, is to just kind of think, you know, try to like take as big of a bird's eye view of the my life, you know, to just be like, this will seem like nothing, you know, in a week, and I know it will feel like nothing, and so I can just almost pretend like I'm there now. I think is like kind of a good mental exercise. uh, can I ask you a question about like your experience, for instance, like your story about your sister entering your room?
Yeah, and like I said, I love when people ask like inappropriate, probing, mean questions. That's my favorite. It's so fun for me.
Hmm. So the fact that you kind of have like a choose your own adventure about emotions, does that color the way that you view other people's emotional experience too, such that you think your sister is kind of being manipulative when she chooses to have like the, you know, emotional outbursts that she's has? You think, you know, she's just choosing this.
So there, that was a great observation. But the only thing that was not representative of how I feel was the manipulation aspect.
Hmm.
But other than that, that was a perfect description of what I go through. When I see other people being emotional, all I can do is project my own relationship with emotions onto them and
Mm,
then get extremely angry that they don't recognize emotions for what I take them to be,
I
which are
see.
just like I take emotions to be involuntary, um, absolutely useless mental states. They're
Yeah.
useless, they're involuntary, and they're random. They have no inherent worth. Like
Hmm.
if I feel extremely offended that someone said something to me, I can instantly tell myself, "Oh, I'm offended. That means nothing," and my feeling of being hurt will go away. And when I see other people get offended, I'm like, how can you not recognize that you're a victim to a randomized, inherently worthless process? And if a process was inherently worthless and random, wouldn't you not respect it? Like, how do people respect and validate? Like, that's what I never understood. Why do people take their emotions seriously? They're
Hmm.
they're they're just they're inefficient.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have that kind of like similar thoughts too about like people's emotions, especially ones that you're like, this seems unpleasant for you. Like, why do you not have the motivation to try to contextualize your emotions so you're not so caught up in your own emotions? You allow your emotions to rule you in ways that are self-defeating, you know? So it's hard to kind of respect people who seem to be making choices to follow their emotions rather than even choose their own better well-being.
Yeah, and I'm so far removed from resonating or identifying. Identifying is the word. I'm so far removed from identifying with my emotions
Hmm.
that I actually don't understand how people do it.
Yeah.
It baffles me. I do not understand how people identify. Could you explain that?
You know what I kind of think it is, and this I actually heard from one of my law professors who was trying to justify emotions. I thought it was a weird thing. It was like during not like a law class, I don't think it was during one of these lunchtime things. And he said that emotions pop up. Have you heard this theory of evolution about emotions?
No.
Yeah. So he said emotions pop up for certain things that nature deems to be too important to leave to rationality. So things like sex and procreation, things like fear and preserving your life or whatever, are when we would expect evolution to develop these emotional responses. Sometimes I think, and you might be interested in this, there's pretty morbid uh, is the kind of guest, I guess. And Pretty Morbid has this theory about people who have like a being identity versus like an agency kind of identity, a choosing identity. I think I'm kind of remembering this correctly, but one person, the being is just kind of like one thing kind of led to another, and they don't view themselves as being like the actor inside their body. They just kind of think, they don't think at all, actually. They're just kind of like, you know, their choices kind of happen almost subconsciously to them. And they prefer it that way. They prefer it to be like, no, I was angry at that because of that. And there's no way I could have chosen a different emotion or done anything differently than I did because, you did this and then I did that. Almost as like, what is it? The anti free will people say, like the Sam Harris guys or whatever. I think they say it's like behavioral, like it's just like a chain of events and your genetics and your environment, and like given the way that your brain's set, that you basically don't have a choice, and that's how they kind of experience their life. That's their day-to-day experience of things, is just like they're not making choices. It's just like a flow, and they're in the current of life and they're like on a raft, and they can maybe like push off on a rock here and there. They have some like thought that they can either choose chocolate versus vanilla ice cream, but that's kind of, it's very limited. Their self-conception of like how much they can control their life is really limited. And I it sounds like you're almost the opposite, where you're not like in the stream at all, and it's like, how can these people experience life that way? But I think honestly there's probably like truth to kind of both of it. And maybe because you experience your emotions in this way, you have less of the kind of good influence of the evolutionary explanation for emotions. It sounds like since you're in the hospital all the time.
Yeah. Um, well, even if I would find myself having normal evolutionary emotional reactions to things,
Hmm.
I would still feel a massive disconnect. I would
Yeah.
simply tell myself, okay, evolution primed us to feel a certain way because it was advantageous then. Is it advantageous now? And if
Right.
it's not, then I disregard it.
Hmm.
Um, but this emotional oddity that I'm describing actually is one of the primary reasons I'm so fascinated with psychopaths because although I'm not one, I, I find that psychopaths are the few minority groups that relate to a disregard for emotions. So I love psychopaths. I love them. The world to me would be so dark without them. Um,
Thank you for
I which
this.
yeah, I treasure psychopaths.
I'm going
Like
to
when
quote
I
that. The world for me would be so dark without them.
yeah, really. Like when I found your book and your YouTube channel, it made my year. Like
Mm,
I re-listened to your book on Audible. I read it multiple times. I watched your interviews. It's psychopaths are the few amongst the few groups of people that are normal in almost all other regards that have a similar outlook to me on emotions. Like almost all the other kinds of people that don't have my outlook on emotions are just globally retarded.
yeah.
So I don't want to relate to them. But like, for example, a vegetable or someone who has like low functioning autism. But psychopaths are normal in almost all other regards, but they have I don't know how to describe it. Maybe like a distrust or disinterest in emotions, and I really, really appreciate it. And it's validating. I
Mm,
feel I'd otherwise feel very isolated.
yeah.
So yeah, we need to keep people like you around. You guys are great.
Thank you. And
Yeah.
here's one thing though, Bob, that has kind of helped me be feel like a little bit more warmly towards people who have emotions is that I think kind of again evolutionarily and not just at the individual level because it doesn't make sense at the individual level honestly for these people to be the way that they are
Yeah.
in my opinion. But if
Yeah.
you had to kind of like take a step back and be like, for the survival of the species, does it make sense to have people be differentiated from each other? Yes. You know, tall people, short people, fat people, skinny people, because who knows what's going to happen? That's what we know about the future is that we don't know what's going to happen, basically. Evolutionarily speaking, certainly, that's true, is that we never know if it's going to be a long skinny beak that's going to help us or a short strong beak or whatever the thing is that the birds are differentiating about, and that it helps the species, even if it may be irrational for the individuals to have these emotions or whatever, it helps the species to just have the variety. That helps me.
Uh-huh. Um, yeah, for me, I haven't yet found any rationalization that helps me escape anger. That's the one
Mm,
emotion that I'm a victim to. I can't narrative my way out of anger.
yeah, interesting.
Um, there was another area I really wanted to discuss. Oh yeah, yeah. Cruelty and animals.
Mm,
And morality. So let's start with animals.
yeah.
So the first thing is that I wanted to note was I found people's reaction to you drowning the opossum to be ridiculous and extremely inconsistent. So most it actually it put me and the reason I'm so obsessed with inconsistency,
Yeah.
it puts me through physical pain
Mm,
when I note an inconsistency. I don't care where it is, even in myself, in a book, in a poem. It doesn't matter where I find an inconsistency.
mm,
Inconsistencies physically hurt my head until I could reconcile them.
yeah.
Um, so here's a massive inconsistency that just made me outraged. Most of the world um, are not vegans.
Yeah.
And nobody seems to care. But all of a sudden, you drown in a possum, and everyone in the comment section is freaking out. So that drove me up the walls. I assume that most of the people criticizing you for drowning the opossum are meat eaters, are carnists.
Yeah.
So it, how do they take their own criticisms? How do they take that seriously?
I agree. I have no comment.
It's ridiculous. Does it outrage you?
I mean, it doesn't outrage me. I just kind of think it just, I guess I kind of just take it as information. And again, like using like the way that has helped me to not be outraged, I guess, is again to be like, well, if there's some kind of global disaster that happens in which this is especially valuable for people to be inconsistent, and to be like hypocrites, then at least we have these people carrying on the human race.
Right. No, and you're not wrong in that assessment. It's just,
Yeah,
for me, that doesn't impact my anger. Rationalizations are just, my anger is immune to them.
interesting.
Um, Now, what else? Oh yeah, not only do people eat meat, but they eat meat through factory farming, which is
Mm,
far more cruel on a far larger scale than any psychopath can ever be to animals. So, criticizing you for drowning in a possum is, I think there's no place for that. That's actually ridiculous. Um, Now, animals generally, I don't understand how people feel any empathy toward animals. I have no respect for them. I think they're ridiculous. In fact, I feel so strongly about my indifference toward animals that if I didn't know better, I would think if you have empathy toward animals, you need help. Like that's my gut. I'm serious. Like my gut interaction is like, you have a problem with me drowning in a possum. You might need to speak to someone. That's my honest to God gut reaction. That's how far removed I am from empathizing with animals. How do you relate to that?
a little bit. Uh, because I have a hard time with animals, but there's a dog that I babysit quite a bit, and it's the dog of my friend whose dad had cancer.
Yeah.
So I babysit this dog quite a bit, and it's helped me to kind of like I used to kind of be like so disinterested in animals that I don't think I ever had like a desire to be cruel because I was so disinterested in them. And now with this dog, I kind of have to do the dog as a little bit of a proxy for my friend, but also kind of just trying to be more interested in the dog by trying to imagine what things the dog likes. Not like I'm projecting, but just really try to be like very openly observing the dog. As like almost like a practice in meditation. Like I'm just going to try to be as open as possible in observing the dog. And that's how I've learned to take like an interest in the dog. And actually, in observing the dog, there are like certain things that I find charming. So, but it's taken like, the dog's been in my life for like 10 years now, and it's taken kind of like 8 or 9 years to be interested in the dog at all.
That's really cool that you made progress. That's
Thank you.
really cool. That's really cool. Um, yeah, to me, it's like one of the greatest mysteries of the universe. Like up there with where the universe came from is why people care about animals.
Hmm.
How I genuinely do not understand it. To me, like if the statistics of normalcy to psychopathy, not that I'm a psychopath, but if they were reversed and 98% of the population were like me, psychopathy would be people who cared about animals. Like that would be the people have like this obsession with psychopaths is like, wow, that's so horrible. I can't relate to being that much of a monster, right? Like people are like, whoa, that's so evil. So I have that just like bafflement with people's connections to animals. Like I would sit
Interesting.
down people that cared about their animals and be like, admit this is all an elaborate joke. You don't really care about your stupid dog, do you? That's impossible.
Huh. It
Yeah,
is
that
interesting. Like the people that care about animals too will like just use it to justify the craziest stuff. Like somebody will whatever. Like, have you ever seen this on animal videos or something on social media or YouTube or whatever, where somebody's being mean to an animal, will like punish it, and people are like, "I'm gonna come to your house and kill you and your family."
Right, right. I
I'm like, the heck?
I did I don't know if this is a cherry picking fallacy that I'm committing unknowingly, but I have noticed with quite a frequency that people who care about animals actually, with a frequency that is surprising, don't care about humans. It's
Mm,
really weird. Or
yeah.
at least they don't care about humans as much as they have like this twisted moral compass, so to speak. Like, here's a great example. Hitler was a freaking vegan.
Mm,
Um, that's classic. Or like you just said, people like, oh, you're being mean to your dog. I'll come into your house and kill you.
yeah.
I have seen that. Um, but also another area that I really related to what you were describing and psychopaths generally, hence my appreciation for them, was the the disregard you have for morality, but more particularly the lack of utility you've observed, or the self-serving nature of morality you've observed in others, specifically your dad.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll get to that in a second, but I should say, that not all psychopaths feel the same way about animals. And in fact, some psychopaths do feel like they don't care about humanity, but they do care about animals. And again, I kind of think it's just like dinosaurs versus trucks or whatever. Like if you find something that's engaging about animals, then that's what you've chosen to kind of like try to stay moored to this world. But with regard to my dad, so I think you're kind of referencing what a story that I said in the book, and this still happens all the time, where if he has an emotional kind of moral emotional reaction, especially, then he'll be like, look, goosebumps, or kind of be like judgmental to me or to whoever else, and like this kind of emotional morality sort of reasoning. Like, there's like starving kids in Africa on a commercial growing when I was growing up. They had like the famine in Ethiopia with like kids with flies in their eyes or whatever. Yeah. And so I'd be like, look at this idiot kid, like get the fly out of your eye or something. And he'd be like, have you no empathy?
Yeah.
Said in this like maudlin kind of like judgmental way.
Oh wait. You said that you made a disparaging remark toward a disabled kid. Was it a disabled kid or African kids with flies in their eyes?
Uh, the thing about the no empathy was it was like some kid. I think it's an African kid. Whether he had fly in his eye or whatever, I was making fun of him because he looks
Right.
weird. He's got like the huge stomach. He's got no clothes. Whatever it was that I was making fun of, I'm like, look at this Joker, and he's like, this baby's starving. Have you no empathy?
Yeah. No, I love that humor. I think that's hilarious, actually.
Mm,
Um, what what I strongly relate to was, first of all, you don't believe in objective morality.
mm,
So neither do I. I'm very strongly convinced that there's no such thing as morality.
yeah.
Um, but also something that not only makes me disbelieve in morality, but kind of makes me disgusted with it, is that it's so obviously it pains me how obvious it is that morality is not in the least bit a principled based, I don't know, practice.
Mm, mm-hmm,
It's so painful. It's a social convention. It's a way of browbeating others with your emotional dispositions. It's
mm-hmm.
anything but consistent principles to abide by.
Yeah.
Even in so-called like empaths and normal people, it outrages me. It outrages me. Like, for example, the opossum and animal farming and veganism. It's so clear to me that there's just an emotional stigma toward psychopaths and anything they do,
Mm,
and not an equal stigma toward society at large.
mm-hmm.
But another example would be your friend that watched child porn.
Yeah.
Like, I have no emotional reaction to that. It is solely a matter of the measurable impact his watching of child pornography has on others. And then from that, I can derive whether or not it was, quote, a moral trespass. But that is backwards from how people work. In fact, you could show somebody that there's zero negative impact from a specific case of child pornography or some terrible crime like that, and it will not matter. It will not matter to them.
Yeah, it doesn't because they're anti-AI generated child porn too.
Right. Right. And the only potential response is, oh, well, AI generated porn has X negative effect on society at large. Like, oh, it will increase sex crimes or whatever. But even if you would hypothetically create a scenario where you stipulate that there are no negative consequences of AI child porn, they still have this very strong emotional reaction and negative emotional reaction to it. And I do not understand it. And to me, that indicates strongly that morality is just some sort of emotional hocus pocus. Like it's really meaningless. To
Yes.
me, that's just painfully obvious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Um, doesn't make you angry to see just how obvious it is that morality is this massive, in some case manipulation, in some case way of aggrandizing one's emotions? Does that anger you?
Uh, I mean, like part of it, I think, of why it doesn't make me angry is because like I just grew up with like a dad who was like so like this. And I just kind of thought, all right, he is this way, and I just have to learn to kind of adapt, and it would be like having like an alcoholic dad or something, and you'd be like, I just can't mention certain things while he's drinking or something. Like that's how it's felt to me, is like instead of getting really angry at like, alcohol or something, I just feel like I've kind of spent all that energy thinking like, how can I stay off his radar? How can I, given that he's going to be irrational in ways that can negatively affect me, how can I kind of mitigate that?
Yeah. Um, do you think that generally speaking, psychopathy is a coping mechanism? You did allude to that.
I think that, and it's kind of funny, and I'll back up and sorry to not be so direct about this, but recently somebody tweeted at me like, "Hey, are psychopaths born or made?" And I said this thing, which I think is like it just helps people to conceptualize it better, which is like saying if somebody's born or made is like saying somebody's born speaking English, because there's obviously so much going into the development. Like a human baby is like in their fourth trimester, it's like they're just barely not an embryo, you know? So it's, there's so much that happens to the human brain and continues happening to the human brain through age 25. I think twin studies are pretty good about showing that there's obviously something genetic, like a genetic predisposition that's either kind of turned on or turned off. I think that personality disorders are a disruption to the sense of self. That's my theory. Sense of self doesn't really get developed until about age 2 when we start recognizing ourselves in the mirror. And the disruption, the particular disruption to sense of self, I think, I don't know if you would say coping mechanism necessarily, but it's almost as if like, like when the body has like gangrene from like frostbite or something on the
Yeah.
fingers and it self
Yes.
amputates. It's basically, that's what I think psychopathy is essentially, is it's like a self amputation of the sense of self.
Interesting. Because I I think it's well known that a lot of serial killers and pretty much all serial killers are psychopaths. It's
Some
on
aren't. Some of them are just like, have mommy issues times 10 or whatever.
right, right, but the majority of them are antisocial.
Certainly a lot. Yeah. I would say, yeah, maybe the plurality, like it's way overrepresented. I think we can agree about that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So relatedly, they psychopaths that are serial killers went through some sort of childhood trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So that seems to indicate to me, at least to some degree, that psychopathy, and this is not to say that there's no disposition for it. Of course, there are dispositions toward it, but let's say one has that disposition, it and then put them in an environment that
Yeah.
is hostile or abusive, it would then seem that psychopathy is a sort of cope or
Adaptation or something.
adaptation is a great word. Adaptation toward the negative stimuli present in the environment.
Yeah. And
You would agree with that?
yeah, I agree. And I think the example I really like for this is the sequoia trees in California, the really tall and big ones. I think the sequoias are the biggest living entity. Their seeds, some of them, not all of them, but some of them are like in a really tight cone that has like a waxy substance that will not open unless and until they reach a temperature of a certain, heat of temperature. The idea being that if there's a fire that goes through, then they'll open and then they'll plant the seeds and they'll grow. But if there's no fire, then they stay closed forever. And it's a great adaptation because it says basically, like, hey, there's room for you to grow now. Like the fire has taken out all your competitors. And so you, a sapling, which normally couldn't survive in like an old growth forest, have a chance now. So go ahead and grow. So I think that is the best way to kind of conceive of this theory about psychopathy is that in a society that's like, in its golden age or something, where maybe it doesn't make sense to have a bunch of psychopaths because your culture's doing really well and you're really kind of leveraging your kind of group cohesion. The group cohesion is working really well, then maybe don't have psychopaths. And so these psychopaths aren't getting triggered because they're in a golden age of like eating well, their parents are happy, everything's going well. But like, let's say your society gets invaded, now you're like growing up in like POW prison or whatever, you're a refugee or something, now do trigger your psychopathy because in order for your society to thrive, it needs you to like grow up and like kill a bunch of people
Yeah.
to protect your tribe or whatever. I think that's like kind of the best way to think of it.
Uh-huh. Um, what do you think is the biggest misconception about psychopaths?
Mm, I think the biggest misconception. Let me go through a couple in my mind so I can choose one. I guess the biggest one probably is that they are like misanthropic. They're all kind of misanthropic, like they don't like people kind of in general, and that they're like antisocial. And I think it's kind of unfortunate that that's in the name, antisocial personality disorder, because I don't think there's necessarily uh a consistency there. I think that some psychopaths can be misanthropes, or some of them can be like have uh bloodlust, and like really enjoy kind of violence or whatever. And I think though that that's not like inherent. I think also kind of this idea that they're inherently criminal is kind of a similar like thought where they're not necessarily getting pleasure out of like hurting people. And that kind of I do think they get control pleasure and they get power pleasure, but kind of like what I said before, people will just choose the different ways in which they exercise control and power. And for me, it was like this catch and release system where once I knew that I could seduce somebody, I lost interest.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I just get to the point where it would be like getting to the point like in a video game where you're like, okay, I don't have to go through the final thing. I know the rest of it or whatever. Or even like a movie or TV show that you kind of were like, oh, yep, I know the end. I don't have to keep going. That kind of reminds me actually of a sad story. So my girlfriend, who has always identified more than I have at least as being gay, and she went to go see the movie Carol. Have you ever seen it?
No.
It's about it's Patricia Highsmith's book The Price of Salt, and Patricia Highsmith is probably a psychopath, a lesbian psychopath who was kind of closeted. So I think she wrote The Talented Mr. Ripley, famously another psychopath character.
Haven't heard of it.
Yeah, yeah. So in it has Kate Blanchett and I think Rooney Mara, and it's like a May December type romance or whatever. Kate Blanchett's older and like hitting on this like young 20-year-old kind of whatever. So they have this romance, and then they get separated, and then at the end, my girlfriend just left. She's like, I know how this is gonna go. It's gonna go bad. It's gonna go poorly. So she just left. Uh, and then she didn't watch it again until like it got on Netflix or something like a year or two ago. I was like, oh, let's watch this, and she's like, yeah, but I'm not gonna watch the end. I was like, the end's happy. She's like, what? I was like, it's a happy ending. She's like, what? I don't know why I felt to like tell this story, but I just think that like this belief that you kind of know the ending is is kind of a sad thing. Like it often ends up like leading to like very self-limiting things if you already feel like you know the ending. For me, it was good because catch and release, like if I ended up fully seducing those people, then I would just have to figure out a way to disengage, disentangle myself. It was better to not have like the person any sort of kind of background history or something, because then it's kind of like the mess of it. Now I have to clean up the mess, whereas if I don't go that far, then I don't have to clean up the mess of it. But I think there's like a lot of things in life that are uh like it's better to have like this attitude of, even though we know basically what's going to happen tomorrow, we don't, and I prefer that, having that openness, especially because when I have kind of a conclusion in my mind, I go into a situation with a conclusion like this is going to be a sad movie, like it's going to have a sad ending. Because her assumption was because it's gay that it's going to be a sad ending, and that's kind of a sad commentary on our society. That usually like gay movies during that time period, or as my girlfriend was growing up, had sad endings where the girls didn't end up together. Um, but yeah, I think for me, the thing that I've been working on for the past couple years has been to try to see things more openly, to not have my own personal biases or expectations color the information I'm receiving from my environment. I know that we do it all the time. We have like really good evidence of it physically, like our eyes can only see so much and they just ignore things that they're not expecting. Here's a really funny study that I just heard about. They're in a motel. The test subjects are talking to the motel front desk person. The motel front desk person like goes underneath the counter, like as if they're going to get something. Another person pops up, not the first person, so a different front desk person, but still wearing the uniform. And most people don't realize that it's a different person.
Right, right. I saw that. And the explanation was because the identity of the person is not relevant to their goal at the time. They're
Yeah.
right. I think it was like in a restaurant or
Mm.
some service place where the goal of the person was service and not any
Was
sort of
just to get the thing. Yeah, get the
yeah, yeah, yeah,
table or get the room or whatever. It is
yeah.
interesting. You wonder like how often we're doing that. And so that's what I've been trying to do recently, is to hold my beliefs and my conclusions more gently so they don't color my perceptions, so I can stay better in reality, track reality more carefully, more closely.
Right.
So I
Um,
don't miss the happy ending of Carol, the movie.
yeah. So it seems like you were saying if you could predict the result of a process that thereby makes you lose a substantial amount of interest in
Mm.
that process. Like if you know you could just seduce someone, then you no longer want to. Or your girlfriend, who's a sociopath or psychopath, if she predicts the end of a movie, she loses interest.
Yeah, uh-huh. Loses interest. And I think that's kind of a sad thing because it also kind of cheapens humanity. I think the truth is that humanity is more dynamic than I was giving them credit for. Like I had the incentive to see them as simple and predictable because that satisfied my illusion of control and my illusion that, I was like a puppet master pulling strings, over them, which gave me like the illusion of control. But the truth is that they'll surprise you all the time. And if you can kind of train yourself to enjoy that, to enjoy being surprised instead of enjoy the illusion of control, then I think it's better for your perception of reality. Your perception of reality will be less distorted when you're hoping to see change and surprise than if you're hoping to see like certainty.
Uh-huh. Um, well, I do relate to not enjoying, or more accurately, being quite frustrated when my simple illusion of people is shattered.
Yeah.
Um, because for similar motivations, it's damaging or dampening to my sense of control, and especially when people's behavior shatters my illusion of understanding because they are being irrational. That to
Mm,
me is incredibly worrying.
interesting.
Um, yeah, that's why I want to lock up the highly emotional people. I don't see any problem with the psychopaths, or very little problem with the psychopaths. To me, the true monsters are those highly emotional people. We can't predict them. At least with psychopaths, we know what they're interested in, and we can make predictions about their behavior and what they're likely to pursue and not pursue. But with highly emotional people, they're just all over the place.
Yeah, I agree.
Walk them up, round them up.
Put them on their own island.
Oh
Put them on
yeah,
a cruise ship to nowhere.
yeah. So why do you think so many people think psychopathy can't be cured?
You know what's kind of troubling to me is that in California, I learned this because I have to take continuing legal education, but there's a program. It's called the diversion program. So people who end up committing crimes because they have a mental health issue that contributed, materially to the commission of the crime can, instead of going to prison, they can go to like a facility. So like if I think it's for addiction too. So if instead of going to prison for whatever crime you commit, let's say domestic violence or something, you go to rehab, or you get treatment for your, I don't know, whatever it is, issue. Which makes sense, especially people who have the capacity to do that, like they're willing to get help instead of go to prison. That makes sense to me. But there's three exceptions to this. You can't be a pedophile, borderline personality disorder, or a psychopath. And I always think, especially for borderline personality disorder, this is terrible that we have this rule in which they're excluded from this because there's like a known treatment for borderline personality disorder that works. DBT, what is it? Dialectics, behavioral therapy. And so that they should have access to this program. And then I think it's funny though, because then that just leaves like psychopaths and pedophiles where we have like no real thought that we can cure pedophiles, or is that even something? I mean, nobody says this, but it's kind of like if you're saying autism's just another variation of humanity and we shouldn't want to cure it. Nobody says that about pedophiles, and nobody says that about psychopaths. That's just another variation of humanity and we shouldn't try to cure it. But I think that psychopaths themselves, you often want help. In fact, I think his name is Willem Martens. He's a Dutch psychologist, and he has an article, I think it's called Suffering Psychopaths or Suffering Sociopaths. And he himself is diagnosed as a psychopath and talks about, like the different ways that people can suffer because you can imagine, weak sense of self, like hardly anything's engaging. There's no point to life and you embrace death. Like where do psychopaths get the will to live? What is the thing that is is nice to them about life. So I think I don't know why there's hasn't been more research about curing psychopathy. I think it's especially surprising since if you look at some people that I don't respect their scholarship because it's like junk math, which I think is really easy to prove that it's junk math. Like it's hard to prove that it's junk science, that their experiment was done correctly, but it's easy to prove that it's junk math. So for instance, man, what is his name? He's like a Robert Hare student. He wrote the Psychopath Whisperer. Kent Keel. Kent Keel has like a lot of junk math where his big kind of claim to fame is showing how much money psychopaths waste in society. Like this is why it's justified that we treat them so poorly is because, like we suffer billions of dollars of losses or whatever it is based on the behavior of psychopaths. Um, I'm kind of like if we're really suffering billions of dollars of losses for psychopaths, then where's your research on the cure? Where's your ideas about like helping these people to not become psychopaths? Because I think a lot of psychopaths that I know want to not be stuck in some of their more disordered behaviors and thinking, let's say. At least that, they don't want to be unpredictable to themselves. They don't want to like lash out in gray rage and end up in prison. Like I knew this woman, she stopped emailing me and I'm like, are you in prison? Are you dead? you know, you just never know or whatever. And it's because she did go to prison for like a while, but then she got diverted only because she pretended to have Asperger's instead of being a psychopath. So it's just
Okay.
hard. It's like it's a really complicated thing and you're kind of like for the same reason that they think that killing the opossum was a bad thing, but they're not vegan. Like they don't find anything wrong, about hurting psychopaths, even though the reason why they allegedly don't like psychopaths is because psychopaths hurt others.
Right. My first thought upon hearing that psychopaths are financially costly and that therefore we should not care about curing them
Mm,
is I feel physical pain because I'm certain there's an inconsistency,
mm.
namely that, oh, really? You think merely because some group of people is financially costly that therefore we shouldn't have sympathy for them? What about the freaking old and disabled, you
Yeah.
inconsistent fools? Like that makes me so angry. Like I would genuinely lose sleep if someone told me that at a time where I was trying to sleep.
Huh.
That's how like for me an inconsistency is like a full body experience.
Yeah.
Um, it makes me angry. Um, it's almost like a migraine in my head, an inconsistency.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's so obvious to me that the reason people are hastily able to conclude that because psychopaths are financially costly, that therefore we should treat them, say, unfairly. It's so obvious to me that it's not because of finance. If it were, they'd not care about the disabled and the old, but rather it's because some sort of like some sort of stigma towards psychopaths is obviously the explanation for why they jump to that conclusion. To me, at least, that's very obvious. As a psychopath, I'm sure you've experienced that sort of prejudice. No,
Yeah. I mean, so I have been fired and kind of like banned from whatever campus of another schools like several times. Like it resulted in like successful litigation because they'll kind of be like, "But you're a psychopath," and I'm like, "Well, the laws about discriminating against people's disabilities are that you have to reasonably accommodate them." So I'm like, "What are the things that you think that about psychopathy that makes me unable to do the job?" Like they have to kind of gauge. It's called the interactive process. They have to engage in that interactive process with me to try to find some reasonable accommodation for my disorder. But the truth is that it's just stigma or whatever. Like they would rather pay the money to me in a settlement, than have to deal with like answering people's questions about like why they have a psychopath on faculty or whatever.
right. And just another irritation is that they can't even recognize that it's a stigma.
Mm,
The level of self unawareness is so irritating. I don't understand how people can't recognizing themselves, yeah, I fire the psychopath, not because of some list of genuine worries that I have, but rather a stigma. Like, if you have some sort of irrational emotion, just recognize it as such. I don't understand the need to pump it up and decorate it to be something it's clearly not. Like in the case of the financial issues psychopaths cause. That's
Mm-hmm.
clearly not the motivation.
Yeah.
Um,
And the math is wrong, by the way.
right, right. You said it was junk math, but to me, that's not like getting something wrong. That doesn't bother me. But an inconsistency that I can't contend with.
Yeah.
I think it's maybe like an OCD. I don't know. Maybe I have
Interesting.
a need for like order. I do have that with physical things as well. Like I need
Okay.
my room to be in order and I need things to be arranged in a certain way. Same with my schedule. If someone interrupts my schedule, I become furious. Like I cannot reconcile a change in schedule. Even like I've been working for someone and the boss, they're my boss, and I logically I recognize that I have to do as they say. But if they tell me like on Monday you're doing X, Monday comes around and they're like, "Oh, change in schedule, you're doing Y." I'm like, "No, I'm not. What the fuck are you talking about?"
Hmm.
Which is hilarious because I recognize I'm in no position to do that. But to me, I experience like a rule or a system so profoundly, it's almost like part of me.
Hmm.
And when someone violates that, it's so. I never met someone that experiences that frustration as much as I do.
Interesting. That's an interesting way to describe it too. You experience the rule or the system as part of you. So then using kind of the language of my therapist, if somebody tries to change it or whatever, then it might seem like an identity hit to you.
Identity hit. Let me think. Um, no, it doesn't feel like my identity.
Hmm.
Um, what does it feel like? It's hard to describe. I tried introspecting, and I always am at a loss for what exactly is the problem with someone violating rules and consistent systems. What is it? Um, I can't tell you the causal mechanism by which I'm frustrated, but I could give an analogy.
Yeah.
So, analogously, I think most people would be tremendously irritated and frustrated if somebody put before them a task, say, of picking out a red block from a bunch of blue blocks, but then they went ahead and blindfolded the person who was supposed to get the red block from the set of blue blocks and just didn't acknowledge that the blindfold was there. I think most
Mm,
people would be very angry. It's almost like I don't think that's an identity thing. It would more be like, what do you mean? Can you not see this obvious obstruction preventing me from carrying out this task?
hmm,
And if someone was put under tremendous scrutiny and pressure to get the red from blue blocks while blindfolded, it would really and the people who were pressuring them did not take into account, at
hmm.
least verbally, that there was an obstruction, they would feel, I'm sure I don't know exactly what people would feel, but I'm sure it would be a negative emotion.
Yeah.
Um, so that's sort of how I feel like a violation of rules. To me, it's like, how can you not see that there just is a way things need to be, and you're just I don't know.
Hmm.
I don't know. Do you do psychopaths have that sort of need for order, or not so much?
So my girlfriend has like uh a OCD diagnosis as well, and I've met other psychopaths who do, like the typical kind of like hand washing whatever things. For my girlfriend, sometimes it's interesting. It manifests itself like she calls it a purity complex, where it's like there's kind of a rightness and wrongness to things, like you've just described, and it's very like disorienting and uncomfortable. Yeah, when other
Yeah,
people,
yeah, you
yeah.
nailed it. That's what it was.
Hmm.
I hate when I can't find the words for like a very profound experience, and that's what it is. It's like disorienting and
Hmm.
dizzying. Like it confuses me. It really, really dysregulates me. That's the word, dysregulates. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, that's why I can't. I can't reconcile people, for example,
Mm.
pretending to discriminate against psychopaths because of a financial problem. I'm like, and by the one of the worst things is that when you attempt to apply consistency toward people, um, they they never or very rarely recognize the inconsistency. It's so odd. It's almost like they always have to create some sort of ad hoc exception for their inconsistency.
Mm.
But even in the ad hoc case, it's so easy to bring counterexamples that they
Yeah.
don't abide by. And I just found myself going down this infinite regress of having to give more counterexamples to endless ad hoc reconciliations.
Yeah. You know what kind of like I can have a rigidity about my expectations about people kind of doing like good or bad things. And actually the TV show Veep, VEEP kind of helped me to realize that people are just like flying by the seat of their pants all the time and that there's no rationality behind it. It has
Yeah,
Julia Louis-Dreyfus in it.
I don't know that makes me depressed to think that people are just emotionally acting and reacting to things. That's why psychopaths are like the light in the darkness for me.
Mm-hmm.
They're like the few people out there that aren't animals. Like to me, when I see someone just reacting emotionally toward their environment and life stimuli, I'm like, oh, you're an animal.
Yeah.
That's what animals do.
Well, we've been chatting for a while now. Is it a good time to kind of stop and we'll try to pick up some. I'll keep thinking about your goal-oriented emotional experiences and some of the other things that you've said.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Do you
All
have
right.
anything else? Any closing thoughts or anything?
Um, in closing thoughts.
Feel no pressure.
No closing thoughts.
Love it. Okay. I'm excited to see how people what thoughts people have in the comments about some of the stuff that especially that we've like asked them for their solicited their opinion about. But thank you so much for taking the time to chat me. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you. Appreciate your thoughts, your honesty, your willingness to put yourself out there. And I hope that you do find an answer about this uh goal-oriented emotional experience of yours. I bet somebody will have like a word that they'll be like, oh, this sounds like this. So fingers crossed for this for you and for everybody to learn a little bit more about that. It's such an interesting way. I think the diversity of the human experience is crazy, and it's nice to meet somebody who I don't even have a word for you because it's that diverse.
Yeah. Well, one closing thought that I'm just struck by is you're like so weird. I was not expecting you to be so normal. Like there are so many non-psychopaths that are so much more cruel, so much more rude, and you're like when you said you hope you find, fingers crossed, you hope you find a solution to my problem. You're a psychopath. You don't care about my problem. So is that true?
Yeah, it is true. And I think for me, and this is something that I've always enjoyed, for instance, about like being a law professor and do like the academic research. I'm always hoping that there's going to be some new insight, some new solution, some new light in the world because I think that's what, knowledge and like I very much I went to a school. They have like an unofficial motto, the life of the mind. And that really resonates with me, personally, even back then when I had a shallower sense of self, it still resonated with me. Like the idea that the pursuit of knowledge and shining light in the darkness is such a value to me, maybe even like one of the highest values that I have. So it happens to align with a value that's very personal to me. for you to find more information about yourself, your experience, and the world, really.
Yeah, that I find that cool because you're better than people that allegedly feel empathy at saying at like paying due to social norms, like saying, "Oh, I hope you find the solution to your problem." I feel like a little. This is weird. I feel let down. I was hoping you'd be far more cruel. I don't know
Mm,
why. I enjoy other people's cruelty.
mm.
So hopefully the comment section. The comment section never falls short of uh, undeserved cruelty. But I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully we could get some of that. Do you
Nice.
know? Like I do you have that same enjoyment for like engaging with sadistic and or rude, cruel people?
Uh, no. I wonder why you enjoy it, but we'll have to leave that for next time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All right.
It's
Okay.
been really interesting talking to you. You're a very unique experience, and I really appreciate you sharing with it. It's been fascinating.
Yeah, I absolutely loved it. Thanks so much for your time.
No problem. Chat you soon.